Well, good evening, America. This is Q News Tonight, the world's first live daily gay evening news show, and it's 7 p.m. Tuesday, February 11th, 2020. It all begins tonight. Dun, dun, dun. Q News Tonight is live and is unscripted, and anything can happen. And tonight we bring you the news of and a perspective from the LGBT community. I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and these are my co-anchors, Aaron Darr and Napoleon Plays. And let's cue up the news. Tonight, we are making history as 16 LGBT political guests are about to report live on the New Hampshire primary that will shortly close. November 3rd, 2020 is the election of our lifetime, and tonight it definitely all begins. Stay with us directly after Q News Tonight for this special election coverage. What we are getting ready to do and what you are getting ready to see has never been done before. Are we all excited?
I'm very excited.
I'm nervous.
Are you
There's
nervous?
a lot that's going to happen tonight. It's the real kickoff since last week was a little fumbled.
Yeah, Iowa basically fumbled and then got killed.
This is my Super Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, America, let us let you in on the secret. We're all nervous here because nothing like this has ever been done. The degree of complication in the LGBTQ community is amazing. So, to get over our nerves, let's dive right in. We begin with breaking Q news. And of course, the breaking Q news at this moment is how to view the New Hampshire primary in style. And Aaron, you're going to tell us how to do that.
Yes, exactly. So one must know about the New Hampshire primary in order to be able to understand how it's going to work. So polls are closing all across the Granite State tonight and in various areas demographically. So 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock. There are 33 delegates that are up for grabs. So it's going to be a very interesting night. Already we're seeing some exit surveys coming out of New Hampshire showing that unfortunately there has been some low turnout. Some polls have shown that 13% of voters actually are saying that they will not vote for the Democratic nominee in November, whoever he or she is. Many of the individuals that did vote in the primary overwhelmingly decided who they were going to vote for in the last 24 hours, which perhaps might not fare well to Senator Bernie Sanders. And many actually did vote in a certain area of the state to prevent losing a state Senate seat that was up for a special election.
You do mention Bernie Sanders, who it's obviously New Hampshire's big night. We're going to be reporting on it live just a few hours or just an hour from now. One of the things that's important to note is that Bernie Sanders is expected to win. However, it is anyone's game. We're going to be reporting on a story where Trump got 0 votes in certain counties just earlier today at a midnight vote. In addition to that, we have obviously this historic broadcast that we're going to be performing tonight, then LGBT, a live LGBT evening news show broadcasting about the New Hampshire primary, which is really the kickoff because while Pete Buttigieg, the first LGBTQ presidential candidate, was the winner of last week's first primary, we're not really sure that he got the momentum that he normally would deserve at that event.
I also, before you go into about LGBT voices, I also am hearing kind of in breaking news that Joe Biden has gotten on a plane and left New Hampshire.
We're seeing some news coming out of the Granite State that former Vice President Joe Biden has left New Hampshire. So tonight, whether it be win or lose for Vice President Biden, he is focused on Nevada and the next contest, which is South Carolina. South Carolina, wow. He is leading, and he is smart to put his resources there. Obviously, he likely will not win the Granite State tonight, so he is refocusing his campaign in South Carolina.
That certainly puts it in perspective. Well, we hope that you will join us tonight for an extended edition where we have many LGBT representatives from across the community in different fields helping us to broadcast what's going on in New Hampshire tonight. And we want to know, with all of these voices that we have joining us, are LGBTQ voices important to you? Can the news of the world have a gay community perspective? If you, like us, think the answer is a resounding yes, then like and subscribe to Q News Tonight on YouTube and Facebook. Do our gay cultural stories impact you, your friends, and your family? Start a watch party. Get your circle involved in our conversation as it supports the gay community. It's really easy.
Well, let's cue up some of our Vote 2020 news. And of course, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, it's probably the most important topic in the gay community. Is he gay enough for the LGBTQ voting base? Before we talk about that news, let us show you something we prepared on this.
And so my hope is that, because I know right now there are so many, especially young people, who question whether they fit in their own family, in their community, as they come to terms with who they are. And we got a long way to go when it comes to LGBTQ equality right now. But I think the fact that I'm standing here, the fact that my husband's in the audience watching right now, is just an amazing example of that belief that yes, you belong.
So what is a gay candidate supposed to look like? Obviously, this is historic, the candidacy and campaign of former South Bend Mayor of Indiana, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. This begs to ask the question, so what does a gay candidate look like? And this also brings up the contextual part of the conversation, which is queer or gay or masculine or feminine, regardless of where one is on the political spectrum of being LGBT. It's historic. I mean, Mayor Pete's candidacy and campaign is absolutely historic.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you were just discussing with that is the idea of queer versus gay, which gets into the whole idea of, yes, Pete identified, Mr. Buttigieg, candidate Buttigieg, however we are being formal about it, announces that he is a gay candidate. But the whole argument is that he's not queer enough, that he doesn't, he's not flamboyant enough, that he doesn't perpetuate enough of the gay stereotype to get the votes, especially from a younger demographic that want to see more of their fluidity embraced in a candidate. And I can't imagine how difficult that must be of a line to walk, to try to be gay enough for people that want this flamboyant nature, and then just like we see on Grindr, it's too fat, too femme, too Asian, too whatever, and then him getting too far into that category. There's no winning if you're going to be a minority.
Well, I mean, this actually is something that they're going to be touching on in Hillary Clinton's new documentary on Hulu called Hillary. It's just going to premiere on Hulu on March 6th. And she talks about being a woman. Same thing with being a gay man. You're either too gay or not too gay. You're too much of a woman, you're not too much of a woman. There is no fine line. At the end of the day, you're never going to make any aspect of the electorate completely comfortable. You just have to be yourself.
Mayor Pete is not my first choice so far, but I cannot allow this conversation to pass without saying and remind the gay community in the United States and those around the world that follow us, this has been a historic week.
Absolutely.
This is the first gay LGBT-embraced candidate in history running for president. He's appeared in so many presidential debates and town halls representing himself as gay. He is the declared winner now of the Iowa caucus, the failed Iowa caucus from last Monday. And now he's a leading candidate in the New Hampshire primary. Whether he wins or loses tonight, we are watching history for the gay community, and we can't lose sight of that fact.
Yeah, we're watching history in a lot of ways. The fact that it's an older demographic that is supporting him and a younger demographic that's saying that he's not gay enough, that is unheard of. 3 decades ago, that would have been something that we couldn't even relate to.
It's interesting. When Will and Grace came on the air, can you imagine that tonight we would be sitting watching New Hampshire saying that potentially a gay presidential candidate could win New Hampshire? It's impossible.
It is, but you know what? Win or lose, this is a win for the LGBTQ community because, again, Mayor Pete is putting cracks in a glass ceiling for each and every single one of them.
And showing that we're not just one
One
thing.
day, maybe you.
Who knows? But that's why Q News Tonight is here, and that's why it is part of the Happening Out television network, because we are the Daily News. But you can also watch the best of entertainment live every Monday night at 8 p.m. on happening.fun. We are also part of the most popular live gay TV show in the entire world, which airs every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. on It's Happening Out. It's a talk show like television's The View with a whole lot of gay people.
Which character do you play? Joy.
I guess I would be Joy Behar.
I think you would be.
I like to think Rosie O'Donnell, but she's no longer there.
We're getting a facial reaction from you right now.
But I tried to channel Meghan McCain's hair.
Yeah. And attitudes, I think. All right, well, let's cue up the USA and continuing our reporting tonight at Q News Tonight and talk about Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos has officially started an all-out attack on Donald Trump And we wonder at Q News tonight who is going to win. Before we talk about this, we've prepared a information summary on it. Watch this.
On Monday, newly released court documents detail Amazon's decision to depose President Trump and others about a $10 billion military contract that was awarded to Microsoft over companies like Amazon, Google, and IBM. Amazon believes the government's choice was based on President Trump's public dislike for the company's CEO, Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos also owns the Washington Post, which President Trump feels is overly critical of him and his administration.
Bezos is saying that President Donald Trump, needs to be deposed, and that this $10 billion government contract for a cloud server, the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, JEDI, was something that Trump put out of Bezos' claim that he was perpetuating an idea that he should not be the one in charge of this. A statement was put forward from Amazon, an Amazon employee. The question is whether the President of the United States should be allowed to see the budget of the Department of Defense to pursue his own personal and political ends, which is what's being claimed. Trump states that the Washington Post, owned by Bezos, targets him, and that Amazon taxes need to be put forward. Bezos states of the press, and that Trump interfered with JEDI.
I wonder, as you report this story, when Donald Trump's kind of shadowy billionaire empire is attacked by now Michael Bloomberg and Jeff Bezos, you really do have to wonder, is the right question who's going to win? Because it's kind of a situation where, boy, he has taken on two powerful allies that he doesn't have the financial resources to compete with.
Well, I mean, even if you want to live in the facade that Trump is whatever he says he is as a financial investor or person, no one is richer than Bezos. That's the whole point of him existing. And so you're saying that he can't win that fight, but we also can't even see him start to engage it. He's creating enemies that are just there to create the publicity, and maybe it'll be a factor that works for him.
Yeah, it's an interesting story of this feud that is developing between the two of them. We want to tell you, America, tonight we are broadcasting from our new set in the middle of the World AIDS Museum and Education Center right here in Wilton, Manors, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We always joke we are broadcasting, and then I turn to my friend here sitting next to me from the gayest place on planet Earth. You fit right in here,
It's the sweater. Does it give me away?
It's the sweater. Yeah, we'll say it's the sweater. All right. And we also want to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living, here in Fort Lauderdale, for the help in the construction of this new set. Let's continue into queuing up some world news. The coronavirus takes another bad turn, as Beijing announces today that the coronavirus response in the Hubei region is directly being managed now by the capital. Before we talk about this, we've prepared this story. Watch this.
The Ditan Park here in central Beijing would normally be teeming with people out celebrating the first day of Lunar New Year. But like right across China, the festivities here have been canceled over concern of spreading the virus. Nationwide, measures are being put into place on airplanes, trains, and buses to detect infected people. The people of Wuhan are being told that starting Sunday, no cars will be allowed on the streets of the city center.
So the Chinese government, i.e. the capital of Beijing, is now taking over direct control of efforts to maintain the spread of coronavirus all across China. This is very important because they've just removed 2 health officials in Hubei. Hubei happens to be the epicenter of the disease of coronavirus. It's interesting how this continues to play out in real time, because now the World Health Organization has since stepped in after initially being told by the Chinese government that they did not want them involved in any way, shape, or form. So now the World Health Organization has stepped in to try to control the spread of this disease, and they're working directly with the Chinese government to stop the continued spread of coronavirus all across China.
You know, we broke the news on January 9th. On the first announcement of coronavirus. So we've gone 32 days since that announcement. In my entire life, this is one of the most scary medical news stories that I have ever certainly participated in or watched, because the speed of how this has affected the world is unprecedented,
Yeah, I mean,
which becomes more scary to me.
It was just a week ago that we were reporting that 500 people died, and not even 2,500 had reported 25,000. And now we're stating not only those numbers significantly increased, but that's still pretty good odds of death from the number of people that are impacted regularly.
2.7% is...
Yeah, and 3.1 people and growing are the contagion factor as to how many people will get it from a single person that has it.
Yeah.
We're seeing China try to control it, but
We continue to report this. We've done 5 or 6 stories in the last 32 days on coronavirus, and every time we report, it seems to get worse and worse. So we hope China and the World Health Organization is able to be successful in this control. We continue in queuing up sports tonight as we report that Team USA's Pan figure skater Amber Glenn has scored a top 10 finish for the first time ever in the Four Continents skating competition. Before we talk about what's going on here with Glenn, we've prepared this. Watch. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was a presentation. Napoleon, tell us about what's happening.
Well, yes, the Four Continents Championship, which is in Seoul, is an ice skating championship. It's the last big event before the ISU had its awards this past week. It ended today. And the first bi or pansexual person in the U.S. team has come out, and the woman, of course, and her name is Amber Glenn. She came 9th in the ladies free skate and also 9th in ladies short. The U.S. team had a lot of impressive wins, but what's really exciting about this is not only is she the first, but she's on a hunt, because when she was in Seoul at this competition, there was somebody that was waving a rainbow flag and shouting support for her, and now she is in social media shouting for her requests to find this person and help exemplify what it means to be a supporter of the LGBT community.
Are you a skating fan?
It is beautiful. I love ice hockey. I love figure skating. It's one of the best things to watch.
Over the weekend, it was broadcast. Did y'all watch?
I didn't. I was actually at a different form of appreciation.
Say Shakira. Say Shakira.
No. I was actually at Pride Night here locally with the Florida Panthers here at the BB&T Center in South Florida. So I do have an appreciation.
Wait,
though.
did you just claim a sport card? And do you put a sport card down on the table that you went to a sporting event?
I did go to a sporting event.
Yeah, but it's a sporting event where they practice ballet to get better, so I expect that.
Okay, all right.
But no, I have a total appreciation for this. I think it's a wonderful sport.
Yeah, it will come as a surprise to you too. I'm a fan of ice skating. I watched a lot of the this event of Four Continents. It's one of the most important competitions in the world leading up to the World Championships. I've been to the World Championships twice.
It's the sequence, guys. That is exactly what it's what Al gets every time. And I tell you, the next time that Al he gets me, I'm going to Tanya Harding him.
I really thought he was going to say that he loves being on the ice, and I was
That's a good
waiting
joke
for the fall.
Oh my goodness, a Gen Zers just told a joke that most Gen Zers don't even understand.
I saw the new movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I saw Tanya.
All right.
Tanya.
Hey, one thing that I have to say, we just reported what Beijing was doing on the coronavirus. One of the scary things of watching the Four Continents competition over the weekend is it's in Seoul, and the shots of the crowd in the stadium were mostly in mask. It was eerie to watch so many people. Thousands and thousands of people watching Amber Glenn when she performed with surgical mask on their face.
Well, Seoul's having a big week with coronavirus and winning Parasite just 2 days ago, and now this.
That's exactly right.
Hope to see more from them in the future.
All right. Well, we're going to continue by queuing up religion, and we're reporting tonight that a Christian minister states that Trump, ready, here, Trump is, quote unquote, just too much of a man, end quote, for the LGBT community. We prepared a little on this summary. Watch this.
I'm convinced that a lot of this criticism of the president also has to do with his masculinity. He's a man. And, the left doesn't like manhood. They're always putting manhood down. Toxic masculinity, white men. Men are the problem. And I think the president, frankly, is just too much of a man for them. They just don't like manhood.
So the minister that our viewers just heard goes by the name of E.W. Jackson. He very seldomly does a talk show, a radio show, if you will, called The Awakening. And on this, he goes on to talk about his right-wing support of President Trump, saying that President Trump is all but too manly for the very far left and for LGBT voters. And he goes on to compare President Obama as saying he is light in the loafers. He in the past has been very anti-LGBT LGBT in terms of his rhetoric, going on to persecute homosexuals, saying that they are sick, immoral, and that they sexualize children, i.e., they are child predators. He's gone on to even comment on the presidential primary of 2020, calling Mayor Pete part of the gay mafia and wanting to establish a homocracy. So it's interesting that he chose to use the word man to describe President Trump, because I think that's probably the last thing that I would ever use to describe President Trump, because as someone who was raised by a single mom, I know that the best way in which one can identify truly as being a man is someone who really sticks up for the rights of women and girls. And I don't think that we can call President Trump a man, especially when he goes around sexually assaulting, allegedly, women as he has for decades.
Well, that's why he is so defending the lack of rights for the trans community, because he knows if it's anything other than having a penis that makes you a man, that he would not qualify.
You know, and it's also interesting. It's the exact same situation that we saw on Billy Graham's son, who leads that empire now in terms of Franklin Graham. His criticism of the LGBT community also focuses on masculinity, and it's something that's very disturbing, and it echoes very hard, which is why we report it tonight. We continuing queuing up the USA in news by reporting a Republican lawmaker has pushed for change of HIV laws in the state of Georgia. Napoleon, tell us what's happening in Georgia.
Well, the current Georgia law states that it is a crime for anyone that has HIV to donate blood without disclosing their status. It criminalizes if you spit or project fluids onto law enforcement. And the statement is that this makes people biased or afraid that they don't understand the condition of having HIV, and that it's a negative and harmful impact. Republican Representative Sharon Cooper has a revision to make to this, stating that it should only be illegal to intentionally transmit the disease, that it should go from a felony to a misdemeanor, and that they should decriminalize the act of spitting or transmitting body fluids onto a legal officer.
Do you think it's significant that a Republican politician has done this in Georgia?
I think it's incredibly significant. She's gone on record to state that there is no basis in science for these claims, and Georgia is one of dozens of states that has a law like this. So maybe this will be an example moving forward across all states that you should have a little bit more of a science backing up what you're claiming, especially when it harms an entire population of people for absolutely no reason.
Aaron, you're our political expert among the anchors here at Q News Tonight. What do you think about the specific aspect of a Republican politician in Georgia doing this, as opposed to it would be completely understandable if it was a Democratic liberal person? Do you think that that's significant?
Well, I don't actually, because I think that if, first off, I mean, let's decriminalize HIV and the conversation around HIV, which for far too long has been taboo. Actually, if you look at the history of HIV/AIDS, the individual that's done the most for HIV/AIDS in the entire country has been that of President Bush. So you have the creation of PEPFAR. You have the continual funding of programs like Ryan White and ADAP, which is the AIDS Drugs Assistance Program. I myself have worked in the state legislature with a former state senator, Jack Latvala, who was a Republican. HIV happens to be an issue that a lot of people, at least that I've come across in the state of Florida, can collectively work together to come around in terms of trying to combat stigma and contraction and transmission around HIV. I don't want to ever try to put HIV in a political partisan lens. However, we do find that there is some ignorance that exists on both sides of the political spectrum, but a lot of the time, unfortunately, I will be honest, it does seem to just be set in one side of the political spectrum, and it is the right.
It gives me the opportunity, I take it frequently, to remind America we are broadcasting from the World AIDS Museum here in Wilton, Manors, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Q News Tonight and our parent Happening Out television network, which includes the most popular live gay television show in the world. It's Happening Out, which will broadcast live tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We are very committed to promoting the mission of education and ending stigma related to HIV and AIDS. And as a result, that is why we're sitting here in the middle of the World AIDS Museum, and very proud to say so. We are going to continue out of our queuing up the USA News to do a news segment that we launched last night, and it's called The Big Finish. Now, the Big Finish gives us an opportunity to move a little faster to talk about a number of topics. Like at It's Happening Out, I have the bell. It happens to be red and blue. If any of the gentlemen at the table go too long, we're going to ring the bell and move on to the next topic. And we're going to move a little faster than we would normally do in some of our more explored stories. Do we agree? That's what we're going to do here. It's called The Big Finish, and it's how we end Q News tonight. And I remind America we're getting ready to begin our broadcast of this historic LGBT first time ever broadcast of the New Hampshire primary. And we're going to begin with other hosts from It's Happening Out that will be joining us in just moments at our table here, along with Aaron and Napoleon. So let's begin. The Big Finish. Here we go. The Toronto Raptors pushed their winning streak to 15 wins last night. Thoughts?
Good for them. I mean, back in 2014 when the first person...
I'm sorry, let me interrupt one moment.
3 words in, everybody, by the way.
Do you know who the Toronto Raptors are?
They're a Canadian basketball team in the league. I've done my research. I know about the balls of sporting, and I have learned that when the first person in the league came out in 2014, the manager of this team stated no one should care because they should just be focusing on basketball. So I say this is good karma.
Okay, and now let me turn to the other person that I'm sure doesn't know anything about basketball.
That's coming from Al,
about
by the way.
Raptors.
I've never heard of them. I've never heard of them. I think this is great, though. I'm all for winning.
Thank you, Charlie Sheen.
Thank you. Right, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Sheen.
Win.
All right, let's continue in the Big Finish. Warren was asked about her replacement for Mike Pence as vice president, and she replied, quote unquote, I already have a dog.
Hopefully you have
What do you
better...
think about Warren's comments about Pence and the vice president?
Hopefully you have a better opinion of your dog than that. And as a human, as a bio-pup, I take great offense to that in my entire community.
Oh, please, I've got to ask, what's a bio-pup?
A bio-pup is somebody that identifies as a human that has tendencies toward puppy behaviors, especially for a sense of freedom.
Is this the kink thing in the leather community where they wear the puppy mask?
Is that what you're talking about? It's only a part of it. It's about identifying who you are and connecting to your visceral childlike self, something that you think you do all the time.
Are you speaking Russian right now?
Are you accusing me of being a traitor to my country, sir?
So he'll cook for you and piss on your clothes. That's great.
All right, let's continue in the Big Finish. Billy Eichner has a problem with Eminem singing faggot at the Oscars. Do y'all have a problem with it?
No, Eminem doesn't sing anything. That's my first thought with it. But also what's really interesting to me is that Elton John was defending Eminem, saying that he could... Eminem apparently gave cock rings, gold-studded or like diamond-studded cock rings to Elton John. Isn't that just a fact everybody should know? Like that thing in itself?
It's a puppy thing, guys. It's a puppy thing.
Well... I thought it was interesting because first off, why is anybody offended in 2020 of using the word faggot? If we pull the word back to us, we're in control, and that's what I think in the Big Finish. Let's continue in the Big Finish and talk about Birds of Prey, the exciting movie that is out right now from the Marvel Universe. It confirms that Harley Quinn is bisexual. Dun dun dun. Thoughts?
All right. Well, firstly, it's the DC universe. So let's get that
did I get
out of the way.
DC wrong?
Harley Quinn is the former girlfriend of Joker
who
premiered in the animated universe, and she's been a long time bisexual. This isn't new at all. They're trying to over promote her because the fantastic Robbie Margot is playing her in this movie and everything else. She's always been bisexual.
I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm not sure that I'm going to.
She does athletic things that are incredible.
Incredible.
It doesn't matter if you're gay.
Is there a kiss in the movie? Have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen a DC movie yet?
We have had so much. We've been reporting on the Oscars and this. I don't have a life anymore. I'm around
gay
you.
Culture card is pulled.
This is
Any
not
thoughts
gay.
about Harley Quinn?
I think it's great when we can normalize the LGBTQ community to a broader aspect of society by making people LGBT.
Wait, you mean like a villain, a psychopathic villain, making them normal?
Even that, I mean, regardless, it's bringing us to a part of the
Villains are more free anyway.
The Big Finish.
The
Let's move on. Nanny McPhee, actor turned climate change activist Raphael Coleman, is dead at 25. What do y'all think about this news?
I mean, I think this is horrible for anyone to pass away, especially so young, and then especially as someone who happens to be an activist for, I think, one of the broader parts and most important facets of political issues that my generation certainly faces, and that's the climate crisis.
I know Greta Thunberg must be like terribly disappointed because her soulmate just passed.
It was the
like
soulmate.
and he did such great work for it too. That's what's upsetting about this. He really made a lot of change. He was like a little young Sheldon as it came to climate change.
I'm so tired of, and of course, all respects to Coleman and family and friends, but I am so tired of talking about climate in the context of when are we going to do something about climate and stop talking about climate? That's what pisses me off here.
I elect a Democrat, and you'll see.
All right. Well, we will see. We continue in the big finish. Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia retorts back to President Trump when President Trump called him Munchkin. And then Manchin's reply was, well, I'm taller and he's heavier. What do you think about Senator Manchin's comment?
I love this drag queen shade they're throwing at each other. I immediately thought of Mario and Wario, or Wario and Waluigi, like video game characters that are just crass and disgusting. Like, why does it matter who's taller and who's heavier? If you're talking about each other like this, then what value does anyone
Because
get?
Donald Trump lives in a world where dick size is everything.
Then
That's
just
why he
say,
does it.
then just say that. Just be like, he has a small penis. I mean, at this point, like, what else are you going to say that's more provocative?
Okay, Munchkin. It didn't make sense. Any thoughts about Munchkin?
I think this is yet again why we need to have a substantive conversation centered around the very political issues that help to shape the fabric of our lives of the electorate. And unfortunately, we have a president that chooses to name call rather than do just that.
But he's not,
Well,
he's a wicked witch of the West.
In fairness, in the big finish, let's flip it. Let's see if your observation still applies. Biden said just recently, Mickey Mouse could run against Donald Trump and have a shot. What do you think about his drag queen moment?
I don't agree. I think this is going to be one of the closest elections that this country's ever seen. And I think if the election were held today, I do think that Donald Trump would be reelected as the president of the United States. And I think if the Democratic primary continues to move in the direction of nominating someone from the far left, a Gallup poll actually came out today saying that 53% of individuals who were surveyed said that they would not vote for someone who identifies as a socialist, as 45% said that they would. And I think that if the Democratic Party continues to veer in the direction of someone like Bernie Sanders, for example, I think that you're just giving Donald Trump another 4 years.
Speaking of that, we are approximately 27 minutes away from the closure of the polls in New Hampshire. And two of our host partners, Ron and Josie, are getting ready to approach the table as we speak, as we're getting ready to start our New Hampshire special. We continue in the big finish by reporting the feds have released Olivia Jay's rowing resume in the Lori Loughlin case, and apparently it's hilarious. What do you think about the rowing resume that got her into college? That's a lie.
I guess she's not a Republican because she's not getting away with it. Like too bad for her, because clearly she should have tried to be a little bit harder for these scandals.
Row, oh, no, you better don't, because at the end of the day, I think it's sad, because I think that there are a lot of children that would have appreciated to have had an opportunity that her child had to get into college. And I think you just have to be upfront and honest, not pay your way to play, and just focus on the academics and the story of each child.
We continue in the big finish by talking about Trump slashing foreign aid, cutting safety net programs in the new budget proposals. What do you think about our foreign aid slash?
I actually found myself in the supporting category of Trump. Maybe I'm just getting old and I support like defense and cyber defense and fear of, some Shakespearean tragedy where someone takes my identity. But I believe in it. And even if the wall doesn't need to be built from my perspective, I do believe we should be able to defend ourselves.
Well, I mean, President Trump is allegedly calling for asking Congress for an additional $2 billion to build his wall that he said and he campaigned that Mexico would pay for, which we completely knew was nothing more than rhetoric.
And someone on Facebook is asking for $897 trillion because of the offensive Super Bowl ad.
But at the same time, what this is doing is it's taking resources away from people that so desperately need them. SNAP, food stamps.
At the end of the day, isolation does not make America great again. And the proof of that is 1938 Nazi Germany. That's exactly how America got to World War II, in isolation. We continue on then the big finish and talking about Trump getting 0 votes in Dixville Notch last night at midnight in the election in New Hampshire. What do you think about Trump getting no votes in the Republican primary against no candidate?
Well, a couple of things. I love this,
Yeah.
by the way, because I didn't know that there were 3 townships that vote in
12:01
New Hampshire
a.m.
at 12:01. And I think it's interesting because if I were ever to become a drag queen, I think I'd name myself Dixville Notch. I think it's perfect. It's a wonderful name. It's a segue. And at the end of the day, it's a couple of votes. Donald Trump obviously is going to continue to be the nominee that the Republicans are going to stand by and put on a ballot.
But these are the people that are most excited to vote. A county that has a midnight election, like for a midnight release, it's people that are most excited. So you have to stand to reason that for this, it's people that are most excited.
Opportunity to catch a headliner.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully they do.
And they did it. And should I be ashamed that I stayed up last night to watch the vote in those 3 townships?
Not
in
at,
New Hampshire? I did.
You have to find some reason
Does
to
that
be happy.
make me a geek? Is that like liking DC and
It's
the MCA?
it's absolutely far worse
universe?
because at least mine has some consequence and people try to prove something.
All right, we continue with the big finish by saying Trump is not a racist. Did you know this? We learned that this week because people who wash dishes, quote unquote, at Mar-a-Lago love him, quote unquote. And you know who said that? Ben. What do you think about Ben?
So the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development really has an opportunity, especially as a person of color, to be one of the few people of color in the overwhelmingly white cabinet of President Trump, to be a voice and an ally for communities of color. And by saying something so stupid and outlandish, it just yet again speaks to the fact of the incompetency of this administration and its cabinet members.
Yeah, it's like a little flashback to 4 years ago. I'm embarrassed being from the same city as Ben Carson. He's known for his work at Johns Hopkins.
And that's an interesting observation. You know what it's really a little flashback to? 1859 in Alabama when they said slaves like being slaves. Because the slaves love
or
their
2018 when Kanye said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that concludes our big finish tonight, and that concludes Q News tonight. In terms of our news broadcast, we're getting ready to start our special New Hampshire broadcast, and that is the news of the LGBT community on the world's first daily gay evening news show. Remember, if it's important to the LGBT community, it's important to Q News tonight. We are getting ready to start our broadcast. Ron and Josie from It's Happening Out are going to be seated any second now as we begin the show. And we are, America, beginning to broadcast the first ever LGBT broadcast of a national political primary, the New Hampshire primary. And remember, this is Q News Tonight, and we thank you. Please, Ron, come in and have a seat. America, I'm just telling you, right now, we are live, and you're going to see people moving. You're going to hear interesting sounds. We are unclear as we go because this has never been done tonight. Or never been done before. We thank you, and we will see you on the world's first news broadcast of the New Hampshire primary. So let us begin. So first, I introduce Ron Brzezinski. He is our Republican political analyst. He's the poison at the table tonight for the Democrats. You're probably going to relish all evening in what you watch. Welcome, Ron.
My pleasure.
Ron, as everyone knows, is a new host at It's Happening Out, Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, the world's most popular live gay television show. 500,000 to 600,000 of you watch every week. And also joining us tonight to start our broadcast is Chef Josie. And she owns Bubbles and Pearls restaurant, a Top Chef contestant, Top Chef All-Stars contestant, Food Network contestant.
Let's stick to the politics today.
Exactly. Welcome, Chef Josie. So are you excited tonight? Because I know he is.
Oh, I'm always excited. I'm hoping that after this evening we'll be able to start seeing a clear path to the White House for one of our candidates.
And that's actually what we're going to queue up first. We're about 19 minutes away from the polls closing in New Hampshire and reporting the beginning of what is happening in the first primary in the nation. The first primary in the nation begins tonight in New Hampshire, but before we move on to that first topic that we want to talk about tonight in this New Hampshire primary special at Q News Tonight is let's go backwards. Let's talk about Iowa. Mayor Pete wins. Q News Tonight broke that news of saying we declare Mayor Pete the winner an hour before NBC, CBS, and Fox announced that. Maybe we were crawling out on the limb, but I don't think so. We reported it, and immediately Bernie Sanders said, I won Iowa. Well, we know through the course of the week that Mayor Pete has won Iowa, the debacle of Iowa. What does his win and the Iowa caucus mean for the LGBT community? What do y'all think?
Well, I've been very open about this with everyone here at this table and on social media and whatnot. I'm not supporting Mayor Pete, but I'm very supportive of his candidacy because I think it's great, whether you're a Democrat or you're Republican, LGBT people need to run for office on both sides of the political spectrum because what they do is they normalize ourselves, our plight, our issues, and the policies that will be centered around our rights to the broader facet of society. And when they do that, they put a crack in the glass ceiling for each and every single one of us at this table.
Well, I agree with you on that. And from the Republican point of view, and being a member of the LGBTQI community, I actually like Peter. I think Mayor Pete has the potential of really bringing the Democratic Party, united. I think he'll also be quite a unique individual to fight or to discuss the issues with President Trump. I would love to see a debate between them. However, I believe right now that the Democratic Party has to focus itself in unifying and finding a candidate that can win if you want to defeat us, which I think is going to be impossible. But I will tell you this much. It's very interesting that, and I'm very proud to see a Mayor Pete run openly gay. And I think that's fantastic for our community. Regardless if you're liberal, conservative, this is a person that we can, and I agree, some people may not support him. I mean, I would never imagine saying publicly what I'm about to say, but I don't mind him being the candidate. I would actually seriously look at him as a potential candidate that could win and defeat President Trump. I doubt it's going to happen, but I actually see that he's the person that really represents the Democratic Party, the traditional Democratic Party, not the new Democratic Party, not the Socialist Democratic Party, not the old gang Democratic Party, but the one that actually is looking for leadership, somebody that can bring them together and will go forward. And I think that Mayor Pete is that type of individual.
Other thoughts?
That's an interesting point that you make there. The unifier of the Democratic Party of the original, the OG, right? Idea of the Democratic Party. I too am not. Mayor Pete is not my first choice, but I do support his run.
His running.
Yeah. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is a sound off for every LGBT young person who is out there right now wondering with just the temperature and the climate of the country, like what does their future look like? Well, clearly it's open and full of possibility with an LGBTQ plus person representing us and taking the risk to put themselves out there, opening up their life and running for the highest office in the land. It's really commendable.
Let me broaden the question on the Iowa caucus, specifically on Mayor Pete winning. We talked about this tonight in Q News of the historic nature of the first gay presidential candidate actually winning the first primary, really, Iowa caucus. What do you think about Iowa screwing it up so badly and the Iowa Democratic Party screwing it up so badly to take away not only the momentum in media, but the momentum of fundraising for the first gay candidate to use that as a platform to spring into the rest of the spring? What do you think about what's happened in Iowa?
I mean, I think it was a really terrible time to try out new things. I'm all about innovation, but during such an important primary, a vote that everyone in the country would be looking at, that's just not the time to take the risk of new formats.
I agree with you. They made a horrible mistake by doing that, and I think that you might get upset, but I'll say it. Who won the Iowa caucus was really President Trump at the end of the
Donald
day,
Trump.
Sure.
because there was more attention of saying giving the president the ammunition
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
attack and fire back, which is very sad. I think things will begin to change. However, we've got to pay real close attention what's going to happen tonight, because I feel that tonight will either push the Mayor Pete towards the head of the crowd, or it could also divide the party in such a way that we may or actually think about going into the convention in Milwaukee without not knowing who is going to be
Who's going to win.
the president.
I want to propel out of Iowa, but I do want to make one observation of something I watched. I watched Mayor Pete speak live this morning on Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. He made the point, which I thought was really brilliant, to where we are tonight in New Hampshire and last week in Iowa. He said his campaign began on Morning Joe 2 years ago this week. He had absolutely no support, name recognition. He's a mayor of a small town in Indiana. And they were asking him, and he was answering about the progress that he has made in visibility, not only for our community, but his candidacy for president over the last 2 years. And then as he explained how significant it was for him to move, I got angrier and angrier about last Monday, because the man has worked his ass off for the LGBT community, regardless of whether he is your candidate or not. He is trailblazing, and that is taken away by the damn Iowa Democratic Party.
Agreed.
One of the saddest things that I heard was another candidate for president and the Democratic Party saying, saying, well, what would a mayor from a small town, the fourth largest city in Indiana? I find that offensive, because you're not giving the merit to this man. I find that really, really offensive, not only to him, but also to the LGBT community. You better respect us, regardless of what political party you're in. You better respect our community, because regardless if you're a Democrat, liberal, conservative, Republican, it is time for our voices to be heard and be respected. So I have a lot of admiration, and I applaud him, and I think he is fantastic to be there. Even if things begin to collapse, I'm going to tell you something. His message of unity is the only one that the Democrats really have at this time.
To that point, let's move into not looking at the past of last week. Let's look into the future. I want to move into a second topic as we're watching the polls getting ready to close and turn to New Hampshire and the primary there. Let's begin by saying we're going to talk to a lot of people that are visiting tonight this special broadcast of the first ever LGBT live broadcast of the New Hampshire primary. I want to ask, what should the LGBT community be expecting tonight? What do y'all think is going to happen?
Well, I just want to foreshadow everything that I say, just with some results that we're already seeing coming out of New Hampshire. So some exit surveys that have already come out are showing that there's very low turnout in New Hampshire tonight, and that 13% of New Hampshire voters that participated in the primary tonight have stated, again, 13% of these voters will not vote for the Democratic nominee in 2020 in November if it's not their first choice. Many of the individuals decided over the last 24 hours. So that speaks to the fact that top 1, 2, and 3, that could easily switch. I remind our viewers that in 2008, on the eve of the New Hampshire primary, Hillary Clinton was third. John Edwards was second. Barack Obama was first. Hillary Clinton, New Hampshire, she won. She became the comeback kid. It breathed this new life into her campaign. Could Amy Klobuchar be the Hillary Clinton of 2020 in New Hampshire? Who knows? But many also had voted across New Hampshire in a specific state Senate district area because there was a special election tonight. So that drove some turnout as well. But regardless, we're seeing that it was very low turnout, and that's going to be interesting to see how that plays for senators.
Well, let's call the spade out. If we have low turnout in the Democratic primaries, what is that foreshadowing of what's going to happen on November November 3rd, 2020.
The first shot is that a Republican will win because it's always the people that go back every single election that are Republican voters.
Ron, help
that's
us with
recurring.
that. Wouldn't the Republicans want low turnout?
Obviously, we would, and obviously, right now, because of the way the country is and the economics, and because of the disarray in the Democratic Party at this present time, I find that that's going to be a very interesting election, very simple election. What I'm really concerned is that people will say, oh, what the hell, my vote won't count, won't make a difference. And that, to me, is very alarming. Because regardless of if you're in favor of President Trump or against President Trump, the participation of each and everyone who's listening to us to go out and vote. And if you're not haven't registered, please register, regardless of what area. Because the important thing is to listen to the voices. You are going to listen, there is one reality. The reality is that if you don't participate, shut up and let the ones that do participate run your life. I will not allow anybody to run my life without me having...
Ron, what do you have to say to the idea? And I agree with you, but that's all theory. What do you have to say to the idea that in the last midterm election, in our, or at least where I was living at the time, here in South Florida, my own county had a recount that didn't get finished, therefore many votes weren't counted. Right. Or in my own county, there was a box, at least a single box that made national news of votes that just weren't counted. It was left in a box, and that just was forever not counted.
In the greatest place on planet Earth.
Yeah. I'd love to believe the theory of what you're saying because that's what our Constitution states is supposed to be the truth, but that's reality, not what I've seen at all. I've seen votes not count. I've been an experienced person in voter suppression where they pretended that the entire location was shut down.
Help us with the question you're pursuing.
How can you state that that is the case? Because we, in our own state, in our own county, we've experienced, or relative counties right next to each other, we've experienced that just votes don't count. We've seen votes just actually not count by individuals. So it's altruistic to say what you are.
I think the important thing here is, number one, participation. Number one, we must become activists to be sure that our voice is being heard and our vote is being counted. I think that's the responsibility of every single American. I also believe that low voter turnout is going to benefit those that have the power right now. Now, what is sad is that in the Democratic primary, according to what you've just told us, the low turnout is only showing it's a loud voice saying, guys, we don't have the right candidate. Guys, you're not inspiring anyone. Guys, pay attention. I would say what Brazil said the other day on Fox News, which I found it quite interesting. Get up, listen, wake up, pay attention. She's actually telling each and everybody, hey, if you don't participate, if we don't find a voice that could represent and unify the Democratic Party, this is over. Why even bother? It's over. And that's a sad thing, because regardless of how I feel that I support the president, I still believe that a good competition will make sense.
You want to jump in, Aaron?
Yeah, I would. Just to touch on something that both of you really said about the importance of voting and your votes counting. This is why elections have consequences. And we're in literally one of the most politically important counties, Broward County, where it all happens in the entire country. And, we had in 2018 the box of votes that you're referring to, right. Dr. Brenda Snipes, who was the former Broward County Supervisor of Elections. She's no longer there. We're going to actually be having someone on later who is openly LGBT that is running. It's very young, that's running to replace her. And regardless, at the end of the day, I think that people just need to turn out, they need to vote, and they need to trust that there is going to be competency amongst the Absolutely. Individuals that oversee our elections.
I'm concerned in your first reporting of the low turnout in New Hampshire. We have seen more presidential debates than ever in history before the first primary in New Hampshire. More debates than ever. And I watch Facebook. And Facebook is ablaze every single day and has been for years now, of depending on whether you're anti-Trump or you're pro-Trump. It doesn't make any difference. It's the same result. If you gauged by social media, you would think the entire planet was following this. If it's easier to do a post than turn out to vote or register, America is in a very sad situation. And my question coming out of tonight will be specifically, what's the LGBT community going to be doing? Are they going to be motivated to respond, or are they going to be apathetic and just bitch and moan in social media? That's our big unknown tonight.
Well,
And we have to be very careful as well to beware of pushing and fueling this kind of negative narrative around voting, okay? Because what happens is we're perpetuating then the idea that the
your
vote is
it
doesn't
doesn't
matter.
It's not important. So why turn
I'm
out
no,
to vote anyway?
no, because that's what I've experienced in my own life in Florida. I had a place that pretended to be shut down, so I couldn't get there. I had my county have votes not count. I
And
had
that
other people
goes
have
back to
recounts
what
that didn't
Aaron
count.
is
That's been
saying.
in here in the last 2 years.
And then going back to what Aaron says, that is why elections matter.
And that's why we
Because-
do vote.
Yeah, that's exactly
That's why it's
you
supposed
vote,
to.
Because the person then who would be in the leadership position, you have to really make sure that these people are committed
You're
to
being heard as you
securing
talk.
our voting.
When your vote is heard and
you
your
know,
voice is seen, that's true.
There's not only the LGBT community, and any American can do this.
Very true.
Don't simply vote. If you're really concerned about votes that are not counted, be a poll watcher. Dedicate a little time and be a poll watcher. Be a captain of a precinct. We've got to act up, if you may.
America,
for-
we are live, of course, and I'm sitting here next to Aaron as he's following what is happening live. I'm going to interrupt everyone all night long. Aaron, you want to report some news?
So only 7% of precincts are reporting. So first, right now, leading is Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire at 27.7%. Second is Mayor Pete Buttigieg at 22.4%.
5 points.
5 points. Amy Klobuchar, 19.7%. Elizabeth Warren, 12.2%. Joe Biden, 7.5%.
The important question before we get ready to transition, Josie and Ron are going to be back later in the show. On our special of this New Hampshire primary, as we bring in a number of special guests that are going to comment in varieties of different areas. The one quick question that I want to ask of y'all as we transition with our guests is the LGBT community going to respond to the call of whatever we learned tonight here in New Hampshire?
I hope. I mean, we report on it very often on Q News Tonight, for example, about a lot of the anti-LGBT policies or legislation that is being proposed in state legislatures all across the country for anti-LGBT bills just this session in Tallahassee, here in the state capitol, in Florida, that touch on conversion therapy, that touch on puberty blockers for trans people. LGBT people need to pay attention because their rights, their lives, their livelihood is on the line. It's the idea and the reality that one can literally get married on Sunday in America, but they can be fired for being LGBT on Monday.
Napoleon, that challenge, is the LGBT community going to respond with the beginning tonight of New Hampshire?
I don't have very high hopes. I know that Aaron and I are here and we represent the younger part of the community, and there are a lot of people that are as excited as we are. But I know so many more people that care more about everything else that's going on in their lives, or that don't think that the LGBT movement can move backward, even though we've seen it move backward in the past year and change under President Trump. I don't have very much faith in our society.
Well, we don't want to exhibit pessimism. We're going to be optimistic, and
there's always the chance. It's true, and now is the year, if ever before.
Right, exactly. I want to transition out of this topic to introduce our first special guest. We have 16 guests with us tonight coming from different perspectives of what we are watching. But I want to report we are now at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the polls in New Hampshire have closed. We're getting ready to begin the first results of a long march to November 3rd, 2020. It is generally agreed in the LGBT community that this may be the most important moment of election in our lifetime. And in conjunction with that, we would be remiss if we did not point out that you are watching Q News Tonight. This is the first LGBT live evening news show on the New Hampshire primary in history. So we report on the polls closing, and we're going to begin. Aaron, as our political expert, is going to keep us up to date in a lot of things. I want to also tell you before we get started, this is a live show, so you're going to see people move around. You're going to hear things. You're going to hear a camera turnover, which has already happened once this evening. Everything. This is a live show, and I know you're going to forgive us because we are working above our pay grade, definitely above yours.
I'm
all right.
fun. What do you expect? It's
Exactly.
technology.
All right. Our first guest tonight, and Aaron, why don't you introduce?
Yes, so I am so happy to present to our viewers someone who's very, so much ingrained here in Broward County, and that is former Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. How are you doing?
It's an absolute honor to be here tonight. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
Scott, we wanted to begin the discussion about LGBT interest, and specifically your candidacy of running here in Broward County, but representing law enforcement, and especially so much that has been said about Mayor Bloomberg, for example, that is going to now get very aggressive after the first four. Law enforcement and gun violence and related legal issues. What do you think about how your candidacy in Broward County intertwines with what we're watching nationally?
I think my candidacy intertwines as well as it can be because our whole the impetus for running is about inclusion. It's about tolerance. It's about getting out to every different community. I've been called the most visible sheriff Broward County ever had. I believe if you're going to ask people to vote for you, they need to know who you are, what you stand for. When we brought training to the Broward Sheriff's Office, and we were talking about behavioral training and things like that, we had a transgender person teaching. Who better to teach than someone who is that part of the community? So the community outreach program I assembled, we had Hispanic people that grew up in Hispanic communities going back into those neighborhoods, and with Caribbeans and with the LGBTQ community. So when people feel comfortable and they feel like they can identify with an individual, I think that sets the tone. And I learned early on that not everybody is comfortable talking to a person with a gun and a badge. Maybe they've been stopped. Maybe they wasn't officer friendly. Maybe they've been racially profiled. So to have people that reflect the community, and I've always said, I want the Broward Sheriff's Office, I want the Broward County resident, the Broward County voter, when they look in at the Broward Sheriff's Office, I want them to be looking into a mirror. I want them to see a reflection of the community.
Scott, a lot of people around America watching Q News tonight's special New Hampshire primary special are not aware that here in Broward County is coming this Friday is the one-year anniversary at Marjorie Stoneman, the mass shooting that took place at the high school. You weren't the sheriff at the time, but lots of issue.
He was the sheriff.
Oh, you were the sheriff.
It's actually the 2-year anniversary.
Oh, 2-year.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm live here. What do you think about the anniversary coming and how guns and gun laws and law enforcement all intertwine?
Well, it was devastating to the community. My wife and I, we raised our triplets in Parkland. I coached football at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, so it was very personal to us. It was devastating as shootings, these active killers are to all communities. The fact that the governor suspended me was egregious. As Dr. King said, an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And for me to be suspended when, as a Democrat, 3 Republicans all said, put me back into office, and that's why we're running again. But I believe strongly that there's 3 types of Americans. I support the Second Amendment. I understand that we as Americans have the right to bear arms. But I believe there's 3 types of Americans that should never have access to guns and should not be able to purchase or possess guns. Number 1, I think if the Homeland Security has put you on a no-fly list and they're saying you're not safe to fly, you shouldn't be allowed to have a gun in this country. I don't think any sheriff has worked more to have felons who have served their time have their rights reinstituted. However, if you have used a gun in the commission of a felony and you have devastated a family and devastated a life, I believe you should lose your right to have a gun forever. You get your voting rights back and what have you. And lastly, when most importantly, when a person is going through mental health issues, we pray for them to get better, as if you tore your knee up and you had surgery, you would, the doctor said the surgery is successful, you wouldn't be playing basketball tomorrow. There's a rehabilitation involved. And when we are going through mental illness, we have a rehabilitation period. And while that's going on until a medical doctor is going to sign and say this person can be around firearms, we shouldn't have
Scott, in the LGBT community, of course, we had Pulse. I was directly affected in the Pulse mass shooting. It's guns and mental health are key principal issues. Do you think guns and law enforcement in general are going to play an important role in the run-up tonight, up to the November 3rd election? Do you think it's going to be important to us?
I do. I really do. I'm not, I have no polling data on it. I'm just an American like everybody else. But I think these active killings and the devastation of people all over the world for no reason, I believe that we have to have sensible gun reform. As a police officer, 40 years in law enforcement, I believe that AR-15s and those type of rifles, they're military-style rifles, and I believe they should be in the hands of military and in the hands of police. I believe we need less guns in Broward County, not more guns in Broward County. I understand, people actually pull the trigger. I'm well aware of that. But I also know that people die of gun violence 5 times more likely than they are from a knife, because you can introduce a bullet from far away. You don't have to get close to a person. And we've just been devastated. And, I think, I don't know who the author was, but a while back, many, many years ago, an author wrote, to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result is insanity. Whatever we're doing, it's not working.
Yes.
Children are dying, and we need to do something different.
Scott, do you have any preferences in a presidential candidate that is, you think, have the right gun approach, the right law enforcement approach?
I'm just for Scott Israel for sheriff.
Yeah, and I think that's something smart,
right.
smart to really focus on your own candidacy and campaign, because I think a lot of the Democrats running are really touching on a lot of the sentiments that you are, is that there's clearly an issue with gun violence here in America, and we need to address it, because what we've been doing has not been working. But something I want to touch on that I think is really important in this conversation, what do you say, because I see a lot of people that either support you or don't support you, and there's something that I see that continuously always comes up, and it's the fact that you were sheriff during the time of the tragic shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and people, I think very unfairly, personally, blame you, and they solely blame you. So the fact that you were removed from a by a Republican governor,
who is now our U.S. Senator, isn't he?
No, this was Governor DeSantis.
Oh, DeSantis,
who replaced you with a Republican sheriff who now is only a Democrat. Sheriff Gregory Toney literally changed his party registration to be a Democrat the day before he was instituted as the new sheriff of Broward County. What do you say to people that really just solely blame you, especially those who are taking an interest or liking to you and want to vote for you because they know that you are a Democrat and they know that you will be there with them on those issues of gun violence, but they perhaps didn't appreciate or know who to really blame in terms of conduct over the shooting in Parkland?
Aaron, thanks again for having me on, and thanks again for asking that incredibly important question. I'm actually feeling just the opposite. Everywhere we go, from Miramar to Parkland, over to Deerfield Beach, down to Hallandale, and everywhere in between, the Democratic community has been so understanding, so loving, so appreciative, and the text messages that my wife and I have received, the letters of support and appreciation, and the "we're going to vote for you, we're going to get you back in," I feel great about that. There's a small group of people, and there were people in Parkland, parents, that have said some horrific things about me. They're untrue, but I'll never push back on a parent, not yesterday, not today, and not tomorrow. I've made a decision that the parents up in Parkland could say whatever they want about me, and I'll just keep going on. I won't respond back. They deserve better than that, and I just pray for them each and every day. Doesn't make what they say right or accurate. But nobody could have done anything about the deaths of those 17 that day other than the wings of the Almighty. It was a tragic situation. I'm responsible for fixing it. I'm responsible for reading the after-action reports and introducing and encouraging legislators, and they have. We've done some red flag risk protection orders, if you will, and we're better off today than we were 2 years ago. But the culpability lies solely with the shooter. What I think the hardest thing through this whole thing for my family and I is about 6-7 months ago, Scott Peterson, the deputy who didn't go in, was arrested by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is the governor's investigative body. And they said, former Deputy Peterson, you had the training, you had the policies and procedures, and you had the equipment to
Why didn't you go in?
Why didn't you go in? You were negligent. And at the same time, our administration gave him the training, gave him those policies and procedures, and gave him the equipment. And then the governor turns around and said, we didn't do what we're supposed to do, but they arrested Peterson for not following what we gave him. So it was an absolute political attack. It's an attempt by the governor to turn Broward County red.
Exactly.
He put in a Republican. He had him switch the very next day to Democrat. We're not fooled by that. The Democratic voter is an intelligent voter. He or she is an educated voter. And come August, we will show when I get reelected and put back in that the message to Tallahassee is going to be the power of the people will and always should and always will be greater than the people in power. I understand one day I'm not going to be sheriff, but I can tell you three gentlemen this: it's only when the community of Broward County gives more votes to someone else. We got 600,000 votes, and one vote the governor overrode that. It's wrong.
Scott, we thank you for being here. Before you move, we're getting ready to have Hillary. We thank you for being with us tonight, and you allow us to focus on law enforcement and especially guns in this primary evening in New Hampshire. As we get ready to bring our next guest in, and Scott, we thank you very much for being with us tonight at Q News Tonight. Before I turn over to Aaron, breaking news about voting that's going on in New Hampshire, I would like to report that we are learning just in the last moments that Andrew Yang has dropped out of the Democratic presidential election. He is no longer a candidate for President of the United States, announcing this just moments ago. We're going to continue as we continue to watch the closure. Before we move on to our next topic, Aaron, you have some news in terms of reporting that is going on?
Yeah, so 11% of precincts are reporting in the Granite State of New Hampshire, with Bernie Sanders up 6 points at 28.2%, Mayor Pete Buttigieg at 22.7%, and Amy Klobuchar continuing to surge in third place at 20.1%, Elizabeth Warren at 12.1%, and Joe Biden inching his way up there from 7.4 to 8%.
Aaron, at this point, with 11% reporting, we're hearing low voter turnout. Is this pretty much what you expected at this moment, just 15 minutes after the polls closing?
I do think that this will be a good night for Senator Sanders, but I think that it's going to be a lot closer than anyone really thinks. I think that both Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar, they are centrist Democrats, as am I, and I think they kind of take away from each other. But you could also say the same with Senator Sanders and Senator Warren, both being somewhat from the far left progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But I think with a low voter turnout, and I think perhaps a lot of young people that are part of the coalition that Bernie Sanders is building that, let's face it, they don't typically turn out and vote. I think that probably, once we'll see the exit data from everything to see who turned out and who didn't, Bernie Sanders is not having as good of a night as he initially thought he was going to. He needed a really big, significant win, but it's only 11%.
It's early, exactly. Tonight, in the first LGBT broadcast ever of a presidential primary, Q News Tonight is focusing on a lot of the different important segments of what is going to make up this election. And it moves into a topic that we want to discuss about women. Women are going to be a key decision-making factor of who is going to be elected President of the United States or re-elected President of the United States. And in that vein tonight, we have a guest representing that point of view. And Aaron, would you like to do that?
Yes. So I am so excited to have a representative here from Women's March Broward, the Broward County chapter.
Yeah.
So Hillary, and how do you pronounce your last name?
So it looks like Dougherty, but it's Dougherty.
Dougherty.
Yeah, but I'm not a stickler about it. You want to say Dougherty? I'm good. We're good. We're good.
And we're good about using the word Hillary. We're
Hey,
A-OK.
We're all
that's what
for
I'm
Hillary.
talking. And I want to say thank you for letting me live my Diane Sawyer fantasy today.
great.
Having it all with the
Great.
headphones. I'm
They're
loving
gonna
every
flatter
second
Al
of it.
too much, but it's all right.
He says Diane Sawyer. I say Britney Spears.
Every time with Aaron, we talk about Britney Spears. the
Hillary,
entire time.
we want to talk about women and
Okay.
women's role and,
Yes.
and how you fulfill that in Broward County and what your mission is and what you do. But tell us a little bit about, in conjunction with your mission here in Broward County, as you know, you heard the top of the show, Fort Lauderdale, Wilton Manors, South Florida in general. We broadcast here in the World AIDS Museum on Wilton Drive in Wilton Manors, and we say we're the gayest place on planet Earth.
Yeah. My hometown.
Exactly. Women are important, and they're important in this election. Tell us a little bit about your mission and what you think women are going to do in this campaign.
Thank you. So Women's March Broward, we focus the last 3 years now, it's going on in February, 3 years, voter education. So a big part of what we do is, this is a very impressive setup to me because we do live conversations with candidates in my dining room, where I do a one-on-one conversation with candidates running for state or state, county, municipalities. And that's a way that people can meet a candidate one-on-one and really hear from that candidate and what they're about. We also do voter registration drives, and we have monthly meetings about every single topic you can imagine, from the census, which is coming up soon in March, and issues that affect, because here's the thing, I know women's issues, we want to talk about reproductive health, absolutely. We want to talk about education, yes. But when we talk about women's issues, I love to talk about this great quote from Kamala Harris, who said, let's talk about women's issues, let's talk about the economy, let's talk about healthcare, let's talk about the environment, because it affects every single aspect of our lives. I know that as women, it is a very important vote. Unfortunately, white women voters tend to vote Republican. And so in this election and in all elections, we really should trust black women and the work that they do and who they vote for, because they tend to vote for people who are going to uplift every single community, including their own. So that's what we try to do at Women's March Broward.
Hillary, help us understand the disconnect. We have covered it in varieties of stories at Q News tonight, and it's happening out, the most popular live gay television show in the world, of the disconnect of how the president has respected women in various different ways, allegedly, frequently, of why, especially white suburban women, are still so loyal to the president.
I mean, it is something you can go all the way back to the Jim Crow era. I mean, white women were always kind of following in their husbands' leads, and I don't want to say that this is every woman, but there is a point of view of like not making your own decisions. And I have to say this, as much as troubling as it is, the things that Trump has said about women, even leading up to the election, to any woman that is alive on the planet, those comments are not a surprise. And unfortunately, it's something that women from the age of 11 or 12 are subjected to every day. And so it's not something that was surprising to us. It's not surprising that someone like that, that kind of talk was accepted and he's elected. So, I really don't know how to speak to that. I know for me, this is one of the most important elections for all marginalized communities, including women, because another 4 years of this presidency is going to do destructive damage to this country that would take generations to overturn, especially with federal judges, with the Supreme Court. We're in a lot of trouble.
You give a soundbite that should bring the LGBTQ community to a complete stop. You said women and other marginalized communities. Women in general consider themselves like black, like religious groups, like the LGBT community, as a marginalized community.
Yes. Well, for one area in particular is that the Republicans tend to think that they can have every right to say what I can do with my uterus. And so in that aspect, we are a marginalized community. When it comes to equal pay, we're a marginalized community. When it comes to being represented on the ballot, I mean, fortunately in the 2018 midterms, there was more women than ever that ran for office, and that was fantastic. But what would it look like to have a black trans woman in the Florida legislature? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would that woman fight for that we wouldn't all benefit from sitting at this table, or every single person sitting in this room? It's an amazing thing to think about and comprehend.
That's an amazing challenge. I've never heard that.
And I think as people in the community like we are, I think that we are the exact people who can identify that person and work with them to build them up as a candidate and build a bench, which Democrats don't seem to ever want to do. And so I think that is something very important that we need to start considering is who we're electing. And even if it's a Democrat and he's a white man, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to fight and have the passion about issues that are the most affecting marginalized people.
Yeah, let's talk about. I apologize, Napoleon. You cut in next. Let's talk about the elephant in the room with you sitting here at the table. Why can't a woman be president of the United States?
I mean, listen, I would love to sit here and talk about the patriarchy to you, but it seems like it would be a conversation. Like, I don't know how long this show is, but we don't have a year. Like, I don't know. It's something that comes up. I have a son and I have a daughter, and I feel like I am raising them in two different ways. Like, I just had the birds and the bees talk with my daughter, and then I said to my husband afterwards, this is going to be a completely different conversation with our son because we have to talk about consent, which we talked about with her, but like, this is a different conversation with a man, with a boy. Yeah. You have to talk about having respect for people and what this means and what that means. So I don't know. I know that for me, I'm doing my best to change that to the next generation.
Why do you think it's going on? I mean, I understand your point in terms of how much time, but are there some bullet points of why it's happening? Hillary was supposedly in 2016 breaking or cracking the glass ceiling.
Right.
She really did that in the first term of Obama. It was going to be the year in 2016, and it didn't happen. Although it did happen because she won the election by 3 million votes in the popular vote. And now we've had many powerful women running, and they just don't seem to resonate in the way. What's happening?
I'm not gonna call you out on your own show, but they resonate
Please,
with me.
Call me out,
right?
Okay.
And so I think that it depends on whose ears are hearing what they're saying. Yeah. You know, a lot of things that were talked about with Hillary Clinton when she was running is, oh, when she yells, it's like I hear my mother screaming at me. And as a man, that's what men would say. And I'm like, wow, I think she's incredibly powerful and moving, and you know, like she's got my vote. Like I don't know, I don't hear it the same way. So I think it's a lot different depending on who you are. I could not explain it to you. I've tried to understand men my entire life. I'm still lost. I'm almost 42. I have no idea what men are thinking.
Interesting part of that conversation even would be to touch on the fact of this, and it's sexism, and it's so institutionalized. So what one person who might be
I was just sexist in terms of the way I...
No, it's a good question. It's a very good question, but it opens up that conversation that needs to happen for sure.
Well, one might say that a woman is yelling if she's running for office, but another person could say the same exact thing and be a man, and they're passionate.
Right.
Why so the double standard that exists?
Why didn't the LGBT community absolutely go into uproar when it was alleged, let's suggest, only alleged, that Bernie Sanders, who is likely, we're reporting, is ahead right now in New Hampshire, specifically says a woman can't be president, and Elizabeth Warren confronts him live in a microphone saying, did you call me a liar? On television. Why didn't the LGBT community stand up for women saying that's unacceptable? There was almost no general reaction. Why?
I really don't know the answer to that.
Well, and also to be fair, that became a very quick he said, she said. And then I think that a lot of the LGBT community is not there to just jump on a bandwagon of, okay, if we're just going by word of mouth, because we've been the recipient of that prosecution in the past.
But the point of my question, which is why I'm asking you, is can't we be in a situation where we have stronger support for the Jewish candidate in the Democratic Party for president, or for the woman? Why is our community seemingly not engaging in the passionate degree that we want? That's the question here. Why are we not standing up in droves for women?
Well, I mean, First of all, and I don't mean to speak on behalf of women, I don't identify as a woman, but I was raised by my mother, who was the primary caregiver and benefactor of my family. And I think that it's so ingrained in the culture to just accept this as a woman's place or as something that you would project to be, and I don't mean that in a negative, well, I do mean that in a negative way, and I mean that in a way that it's imposed upon women. And it's upsetting because it impacts people far beyond just women, and it impacts our entire community on a daily basis. Right. And I think that's part of the problem, is that we've become so accustomed to that we don't even recognize it when it exists.
I apologize for the interruption because I'm coming right back to Aaron, but I'm giving our production team heads up that we're getting ready to seat Dean, Mike, and Chad. Aaron, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think it's interesting when you talk about the whole he said, she said aspect of Elizabeth Warren saying, kind of off mic, if you will, that did you just call me a liar on national television, and Bernie Sanders throwing up his arms like he always does and says, I don't want to do this right now. I don't want to do this right now. Yet again, it's frustrating when you talk about, well, why didn't the LGBTQ community have her back in the way that they should have? Why, and not just the LGBT community, why doesn't mass media, why doesn't the wider part of society hold men to the same standard that they do women? Because had Hillary Clinton, Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, any woman running for any political office in the country said anything of that nature that could be derogatory or sexist, reverse sexism, if you will, it would be national news. They're not held to the same standard. And I think for Bernie Sanders in particular, a part of that is what I like to call white male privilege. Yeah. And it's something that is not challenged enough in society. And I think that it's something that we even see amongst gay men. We see white male privilege all the time in the gay community. So it's a shame that we don't come together on the fact that women and LGBT people of color, we're all suppressed, wherever we come from, and we need to collectively come around together on the way in which we're suppressed and fight for each other.
Right. But that's exactly what we're not seeing. And one of the things while you're still here that I wanted to ask you about, I know that pop culture generates a lot of how we perceive what's going on politically. And The Handmaid's Tale has been an incredible way for people of all varieties to open their doorway to see just how much women are still currently suppressed and how much and oppressed, and how much that could continue to get worse and worse. And we're seeing that in just the last couple of years. For people that have that as their main North Star for what's going on in our country, what do you have to say about how they can be active and about what hope they can offer other than
And we're all leaning in here.
I'm so glad you asked. Look at this. Look at how much I prepared today for this program. I'm so excited. So what I would say first is that you need to be male allies. That's number one, okay? So show up for women. We show up for every single community. Yeah. It's time to start showing up for us. When we talk about reproductive health care, that shouldn't just be women up in Tallahassee saying, why are you taking away my reproductive rights?
Or any capital in America.
Yeah, it should be men. Men should be there because we don't get pregnant alone. I mean, I did just have a conversation about the birds and the bees, and I wasn't talking about people getting pregnant.
Don't blame Aaron for that, I promise.
Hillary.
All right, I'm talking to the wider audience, hopefully. Okay, so I would say also go out and vote. So I did want to talk about Florida. February 18th, Tuesday coming up, is the last day to update your voter registration. So if you want to change parties, if you want to vote in the presidential primary that's happening here March 17th, please go to registertovoteflorida.gov or find where you are and go update your voter registration so you can participate. I would say talk to your women that are friends, your sisters, your mothers, your grandmothers, and ask them about their experiences, because believe it or not, we are more than willing to share and tell you what we have been through, because it's not that fun. But as a white woman, my experience is a lot less than a black trans woman, so I would ask you to visit groups like Trans Inclusive. They meet here at the Pride Center at the last Thursday of every month. It is an open meeting for allies. I would ask you to go to those meetings, and you will walk away a changed person when you hear what the real trans experience is for people living even in a place like Broward County.
Using your privilege.
Yeah.
Hillary, you've made at least one new fan.
Oh, yay!
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been incredible to have you here.
Again, we love your name. And
thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and the bottom line, America, as we talk about this historic broadcast of the first LGBT broadcast live of the New Hampshire primary. Come on, this is really a historic moment. We take a moment to note that women are incredibly important to this election, and you've made it crystal clear why Aaron's white privilege is not not something that we should be embracing.
Oh my
So,
gosh. Well,
Hillary,
have a
we
good
thank
night.
you,
Thank you so
tonight.
much.
We're getting ready to start another topic segment here tonight, and we're going to be looking at the role of the LGBT community in this presidential primary. Of course, that first and foremost begins with Mayor Pete. We've already talked about him tonight. An amazing showing already so far. And we are talking about how LGBT candidates, not only here in South Florida, the gayest place on planet Earth, but all over the state and all over the country, what an important role the LGBT community is going to play if they expect the results that they want for November 3rd, 2020. So, Aaron, please introduce our guest.
So I'm very excited to introduce to our viewers. We have Mike Bracchi. He is running for Wilton Manors City Commission. What district?
Correct. No districts.
There is
It
no
won't matter.
district.
No
so
districts
it's,
at
so
large.
It's citywide.
Yes.
And Mike and I have served on the board of directors of the Dolphin Democrats, which is a local LGBT organization here in South Florida. And one of its former chapter presidents is our openly LGBT mayor in Fort Lauderdale, Mayor Dean Trantalis. So excited to have both
Welcome
of
to
you with us.
both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Would you like to start, or would you like me to?
Well, here, as we talk about the importance of LGBT people running for office, I think that we need to just touch back in with our viewers of what's actually going on in New Hampshire.
Okay.
So for some of our viewers, we see that Andrew Yang has announced earlier that he's dropped out. And with 15% of precincts reporting in the Granite State and New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders is now at 28.9%. Mayor Pete is at 22.4%. Amy Klobuchar at 19.4%, Elizabeth Warren at 11.5%, and Joe Biden staying steady at 8%.
All right.
So.
And would you like to lead off, or would you like me?
It doesn't matter. I'm so excited to have both of you with us tonight because this is so centered around the fact, and we talked about this earlier, that win or lose tonight, with Mayor Pete being one of the candidates, a major candidate for the presidency of the United States in the Democratic primary. How important do you think, both of you, it is for LGBT people to run for any and all offices across the country?
Mike, you start.
Oh, thanks so much, and thanks for having me. It's extremely important. What Pete has done last week in the Iowa caucuses and what he's doing now is really breaking a glass ceiling that LGBT community has never had that opportunity to do. And whether he wins or loses, he's making inroads in a lot of local communities in Iowa and New Hampshire. They may not even know of a gay person or spoken to a gay person, but him and his team are out there speaking with everyone and really, telling them that there's really no difference besides who we may want to marry or who we may want to be with, but the values are similar, the faiths are similar, and that there's really no differences. And I think that's extremely important because he's helping all of us as he moves forward throughout this campaign.
And Dean, I understand you have been very involved in Mayor Pete's campaign.
Yes, I was an early supporter of his, and we had a great fundraiser for him last year. And I think it was very important that someone like myself, who has already been elected into office and being the first openly gay mayor of the city of Fort Lauderdale, was important to show our support for his candidacy very early on, to encourage him to do all the things that Mike just spoke about. That is to be representative of a groundbreaking kind of opportunity that we have nationwide. Because it takes offices like Mike's and my own at the ground level to help elevate people at the national level, and it takes a history of people winning the smaller races throughout the country to be able to give license to those who can actually think in a broader way than others, and were willing to take on the challenge. I met Pete a couple of years ago at a U.S. Conference of Mayors event in Boston, and all the LGBT mayors were sitting around a table just like this, and only as big as this because there weren't that many, right? So we're sitting around introducing ourselves, and he says, "Hi, my name is Pete, and I'm from South Bend, Indiana, and I'm running for president." And we all said, "Ha ha ha," because he's from a small town, and we thought, well, good for him. We'll see where he goes. And then out of the gate. He's already, achieved national prominence and recognition because of a few good opportunities he had to set himself apart from the others. And I think that, those of us who run for office or those of us who achieve success in office have a responsibility not just to our community, but to the broader community overall, because, we are judged a little bit more than say those who are white and straight and male, as Aaron pointed out. But and I think that's okay, because then we become better people.
An interesting soundbite that you said there, Dean, I think is really true at this moment, and I wanted to explore that with both of you. The old adage about politics, national politics included, is that all politics are really local politics. And that, I think, was the point that you just made. America, you may not realize, and let me take a moment to boast for this community. It's Happening Out, the most popular live gay television show in the world, every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, broadcast right here in the middle of the World AIDS Museum and Educational Center. The Stonewall National Museum is located here, and we have one of the most robust LGBT communities in the entire country here. We are broadcasting from Wilton Manors, Florida, and part of Broward County. Fort Lauderdale is our big brother here in Wilton Manors. But a very interesting community in that Wilton Manors, and I want to mention this for Mike, became historic in the last election cycle, in that Wilton Manors was the first city with a LGBT mayor, and the entire city commission is LGBT. Everybody is LGBT in this city, apparently, or at least all of the men and women that I meet.
Well, it's all that you pay attention to, I can assure that.
And Dean Trantalis is the mayor of the major metropolitan city, one of the most important metropolitan cities in the state of Florida, and an LGBT mayor here. This is a very diverse county. Broward County is interesting to us at Q News Tonight because this is a majority-minority county. It's proof that all kinds of people can live and get along together. In that vein, our topic tonight of talking and watching the New Hampshire primary, what role do you think LGBT is going to play in this election cycle leading up to November 3rd? Are we going to be important, or are we not important?
Well, the gay community is always important, whether it be putting forth a candidate or whether they're supporting other candidates. We've always been an integral part of every single campaign, whether it be from the presidency down to city commissions or city councils. I think that Pete's candidacy, though, is extremely significant, as Mike has pointed out. And the reason why is because we have never really even thought to even step into that arena in years past. And here we are with a candidate who we all respect, who speaks well, not just for his own community or for himself, but for America. And I think we're very proud to stand behind a person like him. It doesn't mean we can't stand behind other Democratic nominees who become the choice. But as far as Pete is concerned, I think that we have an opportunity here to stand behind a candidate who truly represents the best in our community. And so to answer your question, we've always been a part of the election process, and whether we were behind Obama or Hillary, or whether we were behind any of the previous candidates that have held office before, the gay community is an active community. It's dynamic, and it doesn't hold back when it has a voice. And I'm proud to be part of that community. And it helped elect me into office. It will help elect Mike into office, and it will we now are the standard by which other communities follow in terms of trying to bring people into office in this community.
And Mike, what do you think in terms of the local politics of how it will affect us nationally?
Yeah, I think for at least Wilton Manors, we have a very large gay voting bloc here, and it's probably similar for Fort Lauderdale, maybe not as much. It's extremely important. And I think as a bloc coming together, will be very important in November. I think people have seen how hard it is to get rights and how quickly, with a swipe of a pen, the president has taken away our rights. Our own state legislature taking away our rights. Last month, 4 anti-LGBT bills were proposed. One of them is looking to preempt local law, local ordinances from LGBT workers in the workplace, protections from being fired, being terminated. That's really detrimental. And I think the more that we see this, the more we move as a block forward, because we need those rights. And it's to just be taken away with the swipe of a pen, it's really, really disheartening and disenfranchising to us.
I'm curious if you had a good crystal ball, Dean or Mike.
Let me know about my race.
You're a winner.
Wait, I was talking about the national campaign, not the selfishness of your campaigns. Come on. We already know what the results of your campaigns are going to be. You're running and you're going to win. Your crystal ball says what? What is your gut telling you on the first night of the first big, at least media primary? What's your gut telling you is going to happen?
In terms of what?
In terms of November 3rd, 2020.
Well, if I think that we are going to have a very strong Democratic nominee ultimately, who I think will defeat Donald Trump. I feel that's going to happen.
You have that optimism.
I have that optimism. My crystal ball has shown me that it will happen.
But not a specificity of which one it will be.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's a little cloudy over there. But
a lot of strong candidates.
But the thing is, we do have strong candidates. We do have, but it's not just about the candidate. It's about the voter. The voters in America, I think, are worn out of this Trump era. I mean, there are always going to be people supporting Donald Trump, okay? But Americans are worn out. They want a president that they can admire and that's going to bring us forward, that isn't trying to disintegrate alliances that have been built up over the generations. America is not about that. So the population is going to come together and is going to vote for the right person. And I do believe that Donald Trump will see the end of his presidency in November. And I think American can be proud and stand up for that effort. A lot of people are going to have to do a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of sweat and a lot of knocking on doors, but it's going to happen. And I think those who are interested in making that happen should feel good about that opportunity that's now being presented before them.
Dean represents a big, major metropolitan city in that viewpoint. Wilton Manors is a small LGBT representation. What do you think from your seat here in Wilton Manors? What is your crystal ball say is going to happen?
So I'll echo what Dean mentioned. I think a big part of it is what happens over the next week or so. We just saw Andrew Yang drop out tonight, right? Where his voters go. Not that there are all too many of them. If we see a progressive bloc, you have Warren and you have Sanders. If one of them was to drop out, and I don't think either one would before we get to Super Tuesday, where would those votes go? They'd probably go towards one or the other. There are a number of centrists or moderates in the race. If one or two was to drop out, that could really boost the Buttigieg, back into first place. So I think it's a little too hard to tell right now until we see over the next week or two Nevada and South Carolina.
So that's the projection of your crystal balls. What is your gut telling you that the LGBT community is going to unite, or are they not going to unite? Do you think over the course of the next 10 months we're going to unite behind something?
Yeah. My experience has shown to me that the LGBT community never votes 100% towards one candidate. That's always been consistent. Mm-hmm. But I think the majority will probably support whoever the Democratic nominee is. And like Mike says, there are centrist candidates like Amy and Pete who represent that centrist philosophy. And then you have the more progressive, the more, we'll say, radical approach to governance, which is Bernie and Elizabeth. And I'm not sure that this country has an appetite for that kind of politics. So in the end, now that you're asking me that question, and we're trying to distill it down to its common denominator, Al.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you.
It might just be a toss-up ultimately between Pete and Amy, because I think that Bernie has a lot of fire and a lot of vigor and a lot of good ideas, but I'm not sure America like I said, has an appetite for the spice that he, I just don't see it happening.
And I want to give you, Mike, the opportunity. Wilton Manors, as a small, very LGBT-centric community like Provincetown or Key West or Palm Springs or West Hollywood, do you think this community, this small town, is going to unite behind a candidate?
Oh, I do. I think Pete Buttigieg has been here in the area, whether it's Miami or actually right up the road, just a few storefronts away.
He was in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, he was in Fort Lauderdale,
summer, yeah.
And he was just in an office building.
And he was down the street last fall, yeah.
So I think that there's a big push around Pete, again, for what he's representing and breaking that glass ceiling. And let's be honest, the LGBT community tends to have a little bit more disposable income, right? They are pouring money into his campaign. I think that's a really good thing.
Well, males in particular, you mean when you say that, too?
Yeah, correct.
Right.
Correct.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I want to touch on something that Mayor Trantalis was saying earlier. A Gallup poll actually was released today, and a majority of Americans, so 53% of Americans today, are saying that they will not vote for a candidate that identifies as being socialist. Only then the reverse of that is 45% saying that they would. I think this is very interesting in this conversation when we talk about centrists like Amy Klobuchar or Pete Buttigieg and the electability of a candidate. But something I wanted to touch on that's interesting, because as someone who's held local office and currently does as a mayor of one of the largest metropolitan and important cities in the entire state of Florida, and as someone who is running to represent a very important municipality in the state of Florida, in particular in South Florida, Joe Biden, actually, former Vice President Joe Biden, had released an attack ad, if you will, on Mayor Pete Buttigieg, attacking his political experience and saying that all he did while he was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, was to put in decorative bricks along sidewalks and decorative bridges, decorative lighting. So it's interesting, because if you look in the past, Joe Biden, when he was talking about his career in politics, he said that on record that he would never run for mayor, never considered running for mayor, because he thought it was much more hard of a job to run for a local office, because it was much more consuming of one's time and work. And compared to that of running for federal office. So what is your personal experience? I guess this would directly be
agree with that.
I guess this would be directed toward you, Mayor Trantalis. Do you agree with that sentiment, that you think that it is very hard work being a local elected official?
I think that being elected at a local level brings you in closer touch to your people. And my life every day, day after day, 7 days a week, I'm connecting or trying to connect with our community, whether it be a civic association, a public event, or just going to a local church, just making myself known. And I don't think people in higher office really see themselves that close or that connected. They should, but they don't often have the time. But I do want to say this, that I think that this idea of experience, I'm not quite sure what how that translates, because Vice President Biden is an experienced person, but he also voted to send us to war in Iraq. He's made some really bad decisions. Is that what experience tells us? Is that where we want to? Is that the kind of person that experience is going to now lead the country? So I'm not sure whether the experience is the litmus test here for the capability of a presidential candidate. I truly believe that someone like Pete or someone like Amy, people that have in their heart and in their soul and in their mind how they feel America is best approaches the challenges that it has going forward. Climate change, aggression in against us and other our allies. How we deal with the economy. People think that the economy is going great right now. Well, we're living on a credit card of $1 trillion a year. So we're borrowing at over $1 trillion a year. Well, of course, everyone's going to feel rich.
Yeah.
If I were to go borrow on all my credit cards, I would feel rich too, right? But the only thing is, I have to pay it back, and this country doesn't have to, because they could just print the money. So it's a false optimism that we are now experiencing, and we're going to have to someday pay the piper in trying to recover from this experience that we've now had under the Trump era.
I want to give production a heads up that we're getting ready to close this segment by having Orlando, Requel, and Len sit down. One other thing that about LGBT importance, and remember about your mic close, let me reverse it. Talk about the effect in the LGBT community about #walkaway and the great effects or the great efforts to fish for the LGBT community by the Republicans and by the president for the walkaway movement, log cabin Republicans, etc. We had a big protest here. Not a big protest in terms of number, but we had a lot of headline of protest by the walkaway movement, and the president being the most pro-gay president in history, and et cetera, and so on. What do y'all think about what we're watching and the effect it will have on the LGBT community in voting and support for #walkaway?
Okay. You had asked me earlier, do you think the gay community is going to be 100% behind one candidate or another, in particular Pete Buttigieg? But, there's always going to be a difference of opinion. A lot of times people are associated with political parties, not so much for ideology, but for culture and for status. And some people, associate themselves with the democratic values, and they feel very, very comfortable in that environment. And some people, see themselves as Republicans, and that there's an environment there that they feel most comfortable with, regardless of ideology, regardless of what a candidate represents, but just the mixing of the members and knowing one another and who they're associating themselves with. So, I used to say that, Democrats, gays are gay first and Democrats second. Okay, why do we choose to be Democrats? Because the Democratic Party has embraced our equality. All right, I don't know if the Republican Party has embraced our equalities so much, but gays will belong to the Republican Party because they're Republican first, and they put aside some of their ideology in order to remain Republicans. So, that's something we're never going to be able to overcome. But I would like to think that that's a small number. Oftentimes they're a vocal number. I have a lot of friends who are Republicans, LGBT Republicans. We have very lively conversations. I respect their point of view. I think that we don't always agree on everything, but I do know that in the end, we're trying to reach out for what's best for our community. I happen to think that the Democratic Party embraces our community more than the Republican Party. I don't think anyone needs to argue that point. The record shows itself.
Right. Mike, any final thoughts from you running for commissioner here in Wilton Manors?
Yeah. I just want to touch upon what Dean was saying. I grew up in a very Republican family. Most of my family is still a Republican. I have the ideology that I go more with social issues. Fiscally, I'm a moderate. I think growing up and learning about the dollars and cents. I think that still stays with me, but that's not part of necessarily who I am or who I want to vote for going forward. You mentioned the log cabin Republicans that had a little showing here in front of City Hall a few weeks ago. It was a very small turnout, really pushed by the Republican Party here within the state, and the board of the adopting Democrats discussed whether we should even respond to it at all, which we did. We put out a response, and I just think from an ideology perspective, most of the gays or the LGBT community, I think, are leaning towards the Democratic Party, although you'll always have a few that have a difference of opinion.
Well, our segment here tonight in the New Hampshire primary is about the role of LGBT and
I was just going to say, I can't let this opportunity pass without asking you guys. Obviously, we're talking about the first presidential candidate that's LGBTQ. And as RuPaul would ask, what would you say to yourselves, to your younger selves, as people that can experience that this is something that's possible as an LGBTQ candidate to achieve, not just what Pete Buttigieg is achieving, but what both of you are achieving here in our communities as well?
It's a good point because when I was being considered to run for mayor, my response was never in Fort Lauderdale. It would never happen. That glass ceiling could not be broken at this time. I ran for a mayor 10 years prior and lost, and it was a significant loss. And so I never really thought Fort Lauderdale had evolved that much. But people around me were telling me differently. So when I made the decision to run, I figured I have nothing to lose, right? So when we step out of our comfort zone and say we're going to take a shot and we're going to see if we can succeed, that goes to and when we do succeed, that goes to show me that the community has changed. So when people like Donald Trump win, that tells me that America has changed. And that's the thing that we have to focus on. Not just about defeating Donald Trump, but on trying to change the culture that brought him to power. And that's a much bigger task, but that's ultimately what we are trying to achieve here is a culture clash that seems to have ambushed us in this last election. So Donald Trump is not changing America. America has changed to some extent, and we now need to work on that in order to bring America back on track where we all feel it belongs.
Well, I'm sorry, final thought?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's also generational. Folks back in the 80s probably never thought they could be out. Folks of my age growing up, I never thought I would be able to marry. And, the millennials that are now up and coming, for them, they're just integrated into society, right? Millennials, they're just integrated into society. Yet you'll also think, oh, will I be able to ever be president? And now we have someone that actually shows us that it's actually possible.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, actually. That is a fantastic soundbite for me because we are a gay evening news show broadcasting live for the first time ever in the world, reporting on the New Hampshire primary with a gay presidential candidate in a city, Wilton Manors, that has a mayor and a completely LGBT city commission with a candidate for the city commission in front of us, where our major metropolitan city in South Florida is led by an LGBT mayor.
And the police are not raiding us.
The world has changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is absolutely an exclamation soundbite of the world has changed. Gentlemen, we're very happy to have you here. Before you move, or actually, production's going to, we thank Dean Trantalis and Mike Bracchi for joining us tonight on Perspective about the LGBT community and Mayor Pete in Vote 2020. We are moving next in our conversation, if you're back with us, about the LGBT political organizations in South Florida. And we are going to have a discussion about LGBT political organizations and their effect on the New Hampshire primary and the primaries that are to come leading up to November 3rd. Aaron, you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, so we have here with us Alejandro Acosta, who is an HIV advocate. So you do HIV advocacy with Equality Florida, which, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the largest equality pro-LGBT organization in the entire country.
We are the largest civil rights organization in Florida.
Florida.
Yes. Securing LGBT rights for everybody.
And Aaron, if I may, Orlando Gonzales, and Orlando is the executive director of SAVE, which is the political activist organization for the LGBT community in Miami-Dade County. And welcome, gentlemen, joining us tonight from Equality Florida and SAVE. We're talking here about the role of LGBT political organizations in our March to Vote 2020. We're using you as kind of an illustration of what's happening all over the country. It's going on tonight in New Hampshire, but it's going to be going on all over the country. Tell us a little bit about what your organization does and why it's important in terms of this process of this election presidential cycle.
Sure. So thanks for having me here today. I think that the most important part in the role that we play sort of is twofold, right? I think that one of the places that we start with is with an endorsement process, looking at candidates really carefully, interviewing them, and deciding which is the best candidate for us in the community. And as some of the conversations have evolved today, times have changed. And in the past, when we used to endorse candidates, we used to look at them and just to like scrutinize where they were on issues of marriage, issues of adoption, these really classic LGBT issues, right? And today we often find ourselves at the municipal level looking at candidates where many people are pro-LGBT. And so now what we start to look at is our issues regarding, what candidates are proposing around healthcare, education, transportation, just even our roadways. And so what this is really wonderful is an opportunity for our community to really shine and to demonstrate that we're not single issue voters, right? We're looking at issues that regard our quality of life, and that our power as a political community is really coming to the front because of all the issues that we spent over the years fighting for our own place in society. Now it's sort of becoming a much more institution, I think, in society, where people look at us as an organization and we really come forward. So following endorsements, what we do at SAVE is then go beyond, the air game, right? Which is where we say, hey, this is a really good candidate. It's all about really putting together a really good ground game and making sure that we're knocking on doors, talking to the kinds of voters who are either, not likely to turn out to vote, or people who are independent voters who need a little bit more of a nudge and convincing to really think about who the candidates are. So if we engage them in conversations about candidates and about the importance of them voting, we can really get them out there. In 2016, I think voter turnout was at a 20-year low at 55.7%. And we know that there were not enough get out the vote efforts, and SAVE focuses on that exactly.
Did that low voter turnout, did that follow for the LGBT community also?
That followed across the board with all communities, and it's one of those things that people are looking now, right? Hindsight is 2020, saying what could we have done better? What could we have done in a way that would have made other candidates stand out more than others? And in this situation, we really want to look at voter turnout very seriously and really consider what kind of role do we have to play in the elections in November. As I like to say currently, as I always tell people, voting isn't enough anymore, right? Asking people to vote is just not enough. Now it's a time to ask ourselves on November 3rd, what is it that you're going to be doing on that day to help get other voters out? Are you going to be knocking on doors? Are you going to be driving around in your car and taking people who aren't able to get themselves to the polls and get them there?
Orlando, I'm also curious, before we come to Equality Florida, I'm curious for you, you're focusing on Dade County, Miami, major county, I think about 3 million residents, a gigantic LGBT community in the United States. How does SAVE interact on a night like tonight for the New Hampshire primary? What does SAVE say about it, or how do they participate, or what do they say to our community?
Sure. So on a night like tonight, at the national level, we're not very active, right? But I'll give you an example. Tonight was a city council vote for City of Miami, of South Miami, and we endorsed 2 candidates. Both of them, I just got notice that they won, and so we're really excited about what's happening there. I think that right now what's happening at a national level, we're paying attention to the topics that are surfacing, the issues that are coming to surface. We're really excited that many of the presidential candidates have already put forth platforms, and we're telling our voters and our constituents, look at these platforms. So very early on, Warren, Buttigieg, and Bloomberg came out with platforms. Biden, was really early in the previous administration to endorse marriage. So we're looking at those signposts really carefully and starting to say, okay, let's look at this, because when it comes down to making a recommendation for the presidency, we'll do that. We know that right now we're still fleshing through a lot of the topics and issues that are out there and watching how they're performing, and also looking at their viability, their fundraising, et cetera.
I'm curious in terms of SAVE. There's a lot of conversation in the LGBT community about who we vote for president. The Florida primary is coming. Super Tuesday is coming. The whole process to the Democratic National Convention and selection, about the effect of the person at the top having effect on down ballots, on Congress, on Senate, on governors, houses in state, and even into local municipalities, etc. How does LGBT organizations like SAVE and organizations like you all over the country, what's the importance of down ballot for a presidential candidate?
Gosh, great topic. I mean, we don't think a lot about down ballot too much. We do know one thing that's for sure, and that is that when we have to look at all of the races across the board, the most important thing to remember is that a presidential race has a really high turnout in and of itself, right? So it changes all of the other races just because we know that there's going to be a higher amount of voters. We are always really careful to think about, when we make an endorsement, to never co-endorse or try not to co-endorse, really, because it ends up splitting votes in most situations. And so it's always all about the strategy that we're going to be doing with regard to turnout. In presidential races, the numbers are much higher than usual, and so we have to just be really careful and watch for how that impacts some of the races that we're going to be participating in, particularly when we have to be knocking on doors.
Anything that I'm curious, I turn to you because you have been very involved in the Dolphin Democrats. That's principally Broward County.
It's the Broward County chapter, which our state caucus is the Florida LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus.
I see.
And our mission is really to support not only LGBT candidates to run for office, but also our allies, which I think is often a very important part of the conversation that's left out, because we would be nowhere without our allies. And I know that you had you had Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz on It's Happening Out before, and she talked about the importance of allies, because the allies are the ones that have an overwhelming majority in municipal and elected offices all over the country, and they're the ones that we have to connect with, establish relationships with, to legislate and make our rights a priority when they do legislate.
It's Debbie Wasserman Schultz on It's Happening Out made a great joke. She said she was a gay man in a woman's body. And I thought that was a great joke. Do you think representing SAVE and your former experience at the Dolphin Democrats and the LGBT caucus here in Florida, and organizations really like it all over the country, do you think organizations like those and others are going to make a difference in terms of voter registration and voter turnout? Those are the two big keys.
Well, I can say that I know that the Dolphin Democrats, they work very closely with Len Laritz and the Voter Participation Project. Some of our board members are very active with them. Just across the way at Georgie's Alibi here, for our viewers who might not be familiar, we have an area called Wilton Drive, The Drive, and it is a bunch of LGBT-oriented establishments and bars and restaurants, and we're registering voters that happen to be LGBT, talking to them in a very nonpartisan way about their voice and their vote and why it is important for them to turn out. And I know that Equality Florida is also doing that too.
Yeah, and actually a great segue, because I also want to introduce Requel Lopes with us. Important part of our conversation with Alejandro, representing the HIV Education Project for Equality Florida. Requel is the executive director of the World AIDS Museum, an educational center here in South Florida. The World AIDS Museum is right on Wilton Drive in Wilton Manors, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Again, proving we're the gayest place on planet Earth, by the way. And Requel leads a mission in this museum that we broadcast from to elevate HIV issues. And we've asked both Alejandro and Requel to be with us tonight because of social related issues that this election night means. And frequently social issues and important issues to us personally, and especially in the LGBT community, starts in HIV AIDS. And both with us tonight. Requel, what do you think about the conversation of politics and what you're watching in New Hampshire and this political campaign so far? How do you think this museum and the LGBT community responds, or what do you think is important in what we're watching?
That's a very good question. Part of what I'm watching is the inability of us to all come together. And if we don't come together, then we're going to be at the mercy of another 4 years. And so social issues are going to be important in what is our focus, what is our goal, where do we want to be, and how do we as a community, as a group, and as a nation stand together against what we know is not the best focus for our country.
Do you think HIV and and AIDS, but HIV issues have been front and center in the presidential dialogue by the Democratic candidates or the reelection of President Trump. Do you think HIV has been front and center enough?
No, I don't think that it has in many different ways, although we do have talk about the end of AIDS funding, it still hasn't been funded. And so we can talk a good talk, but unless there's action with what we do, then it's very empty. And what we're getting is more empty promises on a variety of different issues. So what I look at when I look at the landscape is what are the actions that people are doing? Not what they're saying, but what are they doing?
And Alejandro Acosta is an HIV specialist for Equality Florida, our leading LGBT activist organization. Alejandro, explain to us a little bit about what you do and what Equality Florida does.
Well, Equality Florida, as I mentioned before, is the largest civil rights organization in Florida dedicated to securing the rights for LGBTQ people. Part of the things that we do is we have a full-time lobbyist in Tallahassee. He's our policy director, John Harris Maurer. And we actually just pay a lot of attention to the bills that are introduced. We had 8 pieces of legislation that were introduced last minute this session in Florida that were opposing LGBTQ issues. We actually also promote and support other issues, including HIV. For example, we are working with HIV modernization. The laws in Florida have not been updated since 1986 when they were written. So all the laws do not account for any of the scientific advances that have happened in the last almost 40 years. So no PrEP, no condoms, no U=U, no undetectability. None of those things are taken into consideration. We just had our lobby days on January 28th, and we brought 115 community advocates and leaders from across the state, and we educate lawmakers on the importance of updating these laws because when we speak about, like Requel mentioned, right, the end of the epidemic that has been at the forefront, apparently, right, of Donald Trump's rhetoric, yet, we just heard yesterday that the budget is being cut for the CDC. So even though some words have been said, the actions are not following through. So HIV is still a huge issue, especially here in Florida, because we continue to be the #1 state with new transmissions. And both Miami and Broward are the #1 and 2 counties in the nation, not the state, the nation. We have more new transmissions in the state than California, which has double our population. So there is a problem in Florida that needs to be addressed.
When you talk about cutting for funding for federal programs like the CDC, in Donald Trump's and President Trump's State of the Union address, we were just talking about this on Q News Tonight this week. He said he wanted to eradicate the disease of HIV/AIDS by 2030. And we know that by cutting funds for the CDC, that's not likely going to happen. So what do you say to people when talking to them about, his campaign rhetoric? He's running on this notion of promises made, promises kept. Give me 4 more years. This isn't a promise that he can keep when he's fighting against the very funds that are going to eradicate the disease that he says he wants to fight.
Right. So like I just said, there's a disconnect between the words and the actions. And in the case of HIV, we do have the idea, right, that we want to end HIV by 2030. That's actually a date that has been pushed back. It used to be 2020. And so there's a lot of hurdles that happen when it comes to HIV. For example, in the legislation that has been proposed, this year has not been even scheduled for any committee hearings. And this has bipartisan support. So it could be a very easy win for both parties. And it would be actually, in accordance to what the White House is saying, that they want to end HIV by 2030. So yeah, HIV continues to be a problem, not only at the state level, but also at the national level. And I think that, like Requel mentioned, it's not being at the forefront enough of the candidates. It's not being part of the debates. He's mentioned briefly, but it's nothing like it should be.
Anything else that we want to talk about? The value of LGBT organizations, many sitting here at the table. Any other thoughts?
I think just a perfect note to talk about this is someone who's been very involved with LGBT organizations in South Florida, and God knows we have a lot of them down here. Unfortunately for our other LGBT brothers and sisters and even our allies in other places all over the country, there are not enough of them
Right.
here. We kind of live in this bubble here, especially the gayest place on the planet.
We're talking to Des Moines and
We're talking
someplace in Montana.
Exactly. We're talking
Yeah.
about those very rural areas that don't have this benefit of local organizations reaching out and doing the very important work to fight for the very issues that help to shape the fabric of our lives. So I thank the both of you, and you, of course, Requel, for the work that you do here with the World AIDS Museum and Education Center, because it's so crucial, because I can say to all three of you that the work that you do is not only life-saving, but it's life-changing for future generations to come.
It's a tremendous soundbite in terms of the value of our LGBT organizations.
Exactly.
I want to give a heads up to production. We're getting ready. Our It's Happening Out hosts are getting ready to transition. I want to thank you tonight. But before you move, I want to say one final thing as an echo to Aaron. Requel is the executive director here at the World AIDS Museum. And It's Happening Out, the Happening Out television network, and especially the three of us at Q News Tonight have made a major commitment in 2020 in our support of the World AIDS Museum. We constantly tell this story. And very apropos tonight in this political night of this first New Hampshire primary that an LGBT news show has ever covered, that the number one issue when she became executive director was, why is there even a need for a World AIDS Museum? And we are fundamentally supporting the World AIDS Museum and the Educational Center. This museum fights stigma. This museum supports our LGBT community. And we are very proud to say, with Requel sitting here as executive director, our support of it is going to be deep and rich. And we are going to, in varieties of different ways, encourage you, America, to support your World AIDS Museum. It's something that's very, very important. And when our politicians don't follow through with the words, which I hear all three of you say, a very similar story, we have greater and greater obligation to do that. So we thank you very much, and we're happy that you're with us here tonight on this historic event. We are going to get ready to transition back with our It's Happening Out host, and we are 1 hour and 15 minutes into the closure of the polls in New Hampshire. We're working on the most current results. Anything that you want to report?
Yeah, so the race is kind of getting a little tight for first and second place, if you ask me. With 33% of precincts reporting, you have 27.5% of Sanders support, so he is number one. Mayor Pete is 23.3%, so he's just he is inching his way up. Third is 19.7%, which is Amy Klobuchar, so she's staying pretty steady there at 19% the entire time. The biggest hit that we're seeing really is fourth place with Senator Elizabeth Warren. She's gone down from holding a steady 10.7% to now a 9.9%. And Joe Biden still staying steady at 8.3%. So with 33% of precincts reporting, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Granite State plays out. And with it being so close in the results for Sanders and for Pete and even for Senator Amy Klobuchar, I would like to touch on the fact that the delegates, when they are delegated to the candidates, it's going to virtually look like a tie.
The results at this point, are you hearing any irregularities, any criticism in terms of how the election process is going in New Hampshire?
Not at this point. I've just read that people are truly trying to get the results as they come in real time from precinct to precinct. So I'm sure it is a Democratic primary, so I'm sure we will hear some chaos and drama before the end of the night.
Before we bring our It's Happening Out host back, Aaron, introduce our next guest tonight. Right.
So I am so excited to have these two guests with us. We were just talking in our previous segment about the importance of LGBT groups and the importance of LGBT people voting and LGBT people running for office. So I have here my dear friend, Michael Albetta, who is a former chapter president of the Dolphin Democrats here in Broward County, and he is a region director for Area 6 for the Florida LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus.
That is correct.
Yes. Thank you for being with us this evening. And someone that I actually met through the Dolphin Democrats, which again is the local LGBT chapter of the Florida LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus, is Chad Klitzman. What I found very pleasantly surprising about you was there was a candidate form for Broward County Board of Supervisor of Elections. And you were there, and with people that are twice your age, you literally wiped the floor with them. You're young, and you're LGBT, and you are really catching the attention of a lot of people in this race to kind of foreshadow someone like Mayor Pete Buttigieg doing the same thing nationally. So thank you so much for both of you being here this evening.
Thank you.
And so.
No. I was going to begin with Michael. Explain to us how the LGBT advocacy organization that, of course, Dolphin Democrats is one of many organizations a part of it. Explain that, and remember, we have a national audience, so they're listening to how this might apply to other states, et cetera. Explain to us what you do.
Terrific. The LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus, that's the official name now. First it was called the Triangle Democrats. I'm going to take it back a little institutional knowledge. It was called the Triangle Democrats, and back in, I would say 2004, and the name was changed then to the GLBT Democrats, and then the name was changed to the LGBT Democrats.
How did that happen?
Yeah, and then now it's called the LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus of the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
We are an arm of the Florida Democratic Party. There is many other caucuses: the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, the Veterans Caucus, the Disabled Caucus, and it goes on. I had the honor and privilege and pleasure of being elected as president in 2004. I was given, at that time, 149 Yahoo names, and they said, "Here is your data," and I said, "Oh, okay." So what I did was I formed it like a business, and then I branched that to chapters, and then we first started with 10 chapters throughout the state of Florida. And now I'm happy, just to speed up the story, is now we're up to 21 chapters from Miami to Jacksonville to Pensacola, and there's 4 new chapters in the past year in red counties of Volusia, Brevard, Highlands, and Okaloosa. And there are 2 long dormant chapters that revitalized, and now the Miami-Dade and also the Orange County chapters. And also, happy to say is that in the phoenix that's going to come out of the fire is the ashes is Monroe-Dade, and which I'm very happy to hear, Key West, and that's a very strong chapter that's going to be coming out very shortly. And now there's new outreach efforts on diversity and also veterans with LGBT veterans within the caucus now.
Well, I want to touch on something that I think a lot of our viewers probably don't know if they're not familiar with, especially with the local caucus here.
Sure.
So the Dolphin Democrats, which is chartered under the state caucus.
Correct.
You guys started in, what was it, 1982, 1983?
The Dolphin Democrats go back to 1982. Yeah.
Yes, and when you guys started, it was a very big controversial deal for that to be happening because, one, you were the first chapter of any kind of LGBT organization
within Broward Democratic politics.
Here, and you guys did not have a lot of support initially, and even Mayor Trantalis, who was one of our guests earlier, he's a former chapter president. So there's a lot of history. Even Justin Flippin, former chapter president.
That is
correct.
correct.
So it kind of seems as if the Dolphin Democrats serves as a launching pad for LGBT people to run for office.
If I may say, Darren, their name, Aaron, is the name was, I believe this was called the Tuesday Night Club. It was hidden, and that's how they had to come to meet. And Aaron, I'll tell you, is that under the Tuesday Night Club, then they came together, and they said, okay, who would like to be known as the Democrats? And then then that's when they became the Dolphin Democrats. And at 1982, what was that year? That's when the Dolphins, the football team, again, became they took notoriety throughout their season, and they said, let's call us the Dolphin Democrats of the Fame League.
Yeah.
But they had the triangle there, and all the colors and everything else is there.
Chad, I want to turn to you. Tell us a little bit about what your office does, and to Aaron's point about younger. You're millennial or
yes,
Gen Z?
I'm a millennial. Yep.
You're one of the ones that I, as a baby boomer, blame everything in life on. So, you're,
so please tell him all the reasons that he's wrong. We're just waiting.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your office and why, as a young millennial, you are out there getting involved in politics.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm running for Supervisor of Elections here in Broward County, which unfortunately a lot of people across the country are familiar with because we've had a couple of issues over the past couple of decades, put it lightly, that have generated some headlines, literally going back to the year 2000 when everyone was talking about Chad, right? So from a very young age, I've been uniquely...
I just got it, the connection
I won't leave your vote hanging. I won't leave your vote hanging.
This is called Gore v. Bush.
It took you this long to get to a hanging, Chad. Don't lecture me on being slow to what the joke is.
But, so I've had a unique appreciation my entire life that every vote really does count. Because when I was really young, I was made very aware of that. And unfortunately, here in Broward, we have kind of like a crisis in confidence. Yeah. And I've always maintained that this is fundamental to everything else we do. If you don't feel confident that your voice matters, that your vote counts, it's pretty hard to enact change, to get other people excited about other issues with issues with the elections office. So that's why I jumped into this race. This office is meant to not only count the ballots, but also educate the public. It's supposed to be doing things like protecting the vote and doing a lot more with respect to awareness of issues, civics education. So those are the things that I thought needed to be improved in this office, and that's why I jumped into the race. And I actually started my campaign by doing something no one has done before. I personally drove 4,000 miles. I went to all 67 Florida counties. And I met with 30 supervisors of elections to try to find best practices that we could bring back to Broward. Because the reality is that Broward and Palm Beach, they generate a lot of headlines, but the other elections offices manage to do their job pretty well. So I thought it made sense to go to other places where they're interpreting the exact same laws and see what they're doing and see if we could be doing them here in Broward.
What do you think makes that the case, the fact that these two counties that we're so close to right now, that we're in right now, seem to have all of these tumultuous problems on a recurring basis, to the fact that they're known for it across the entire country, and then the other 65 counties that exist seem to get it right every time? Why is that the case?
So I think a lot of and I've studied Broward extensively. I can't speak to Palm Beach as much, but I think the issue that we've had in Broward is that we haven't had great internal processes. And the thing that I've called for day one, we need uniformity in process in this office. So every function of the office, from voter registration to a recount, there has to be a corresponding procedure or manual. And when feasible, we need to make it publicly available so that members of the public can hold the office accountable. This is something that's standard operating procedure in other parts of the state. And in Broward, not much is codified internally. They're using the election code, obviously, and they try to stay within the confines of the code. But if you speak to folks who were involved with the recount back in 2018, I've spoken with people in the office, outside the office, with attorneys. People were saying they didn't even have checklists as they were going through their recount procedure. And that's why it kind of seems like there's chaos. And there's no need for it, because when you have chaos with respect to an election, that makes it seem like your vote doesn't count. It undermines voter confidence, not just in Broward, but across the entire nation. And then that goes to turnout. And then people feel like, well, why bother?
I'm curious, Chad, what's the reaction? America, you do know, but maybe not in this specificity. Broward County has been very centric to the entire nation in a voting process. Gore, Bush in 2000, and the last election, in terms of losing a senator. We lost the Democratic senator that was needed in the vote for impeachment, as an example. Broward County has been at the center of so much. Being an LGBT candidate and a millennial, have you had any pushback on either one of those things, that you're gay or that you're young? Any pushback here?
I've gotten more pushback because I'm young than because I'm gay.
Exactly right.
But to be honest, I've been pleasantly surprised. When you come out right out of the gate and you have concrete ideas and a vision for the office, people really haven't harped too much on my age because I'm offering a unique vision for how I'm going to shepherd this office in the 21st century. I think being a young person uniquely suits me for this job because this is an office that has needed to be modernized for a really long time. And I think you need someone who's aware of the latest practices to go into a place like the Supervisor of Elections office and offer that perspective. You also need someone with energy and enthusiasm to get people excited about voting. And that's going to require a lot of work going into the community, going into the schools, doing voter education. It's not about just getting people registered. You have to start in elementary school. If you go to other counties across the state of Florida, they're going in and doing mock elections starting in kindergarten. And that's the sort of thing that we should be doing here in Broward. So that's the young piece of it. And then as far as being a gay candidate, I've always maintained that when we run and when we're seen and when we're heard, our voices are amplified. And it's just so important for us to be seen. I think about the impact that my running would have had on my younger self. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to come home and do this, because it's so important that, in the state of Florida, we have never had an openly LGBT constitutional officer. If I got elected, I would be the first, which is kind of incredible. You'd think, we've had a lot of progress made, especially in Broward and Dade, and yet in these constitutional officer positions, we haven't been able to.
And Chad, I have to ask, I'm fascinated in meeting you, and before you introduce our next guest here at the table, the issue of millennial is really a key piece. Your clear understanding of why this is all important. What would you say, as we're watching the New Hampshire primary unfold and this election process, millennials for the LGBT community, but for Florida and America in total? If Bernie Sanders is going to win, it's going to be because of millennials. If the Democrats are going to win, it's probably going to be for millennials. What would you say to, you're not going to turn out, and as a result, we likely are going to lose the election? And that has happened over and over and over again. Older baby boomer voters turn out religiously. Millennials do not. What would you say to the country that is watching you right now about millennials and why it's important millennials turn out?
Yeah, listen, these issues that the folks that we're electing to office legislate on, they impact you, and they are going to have ramifications for decades. And I think that's why it's so important for young people to participate. I do think that candidates need to do a much better job of catering to young people by talking about issues that young people care about. And it's not rocket science why Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren tend to do better with younger people. They're talking about issues that matter to young people, like student loan debt. So, but more broadly, my thing, and this is why I think it's so important for us to be doing voter education, the way we get young people excited about voting is by starting when they're young. I'm not talking about 18, I'm talking about first grade. And that's something that the Supervisor of Elections office has the capacity to do. And they're doing it in other counties. So that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to potentially take on this job, because there's so much capacity for impact.
I've asked the crystal ball question all evening. I asked you specifically, your crystal ball. What are millennials going to do November 3rd, 2020?
Yeah, I think that millennials are going to coalesce behind a candidate, folks who are concerned that we're going to be completely divided. I think people recognize that this is going to be a really important election, and if they don't show up, there are going to be ramifications for not just a couple of years, but if you look at the success with which Mitch McConnell has put through judicial candidates, the ramifications are going to be felt for decades to come. I think people recognize that. So while I think the primary process is going to be a lot longer than a lot of us would like, ultimately people will coalesce behind a singular candidate, and that will be good for the party. I do want to note one thing on New Hampshire, because I had done some research into New Hampshire's voting systems. This is something that doesn't get a lot of attention. We don't spend a lot of time talking about what's the actual election equipment that they're using. In New Hampshire, they're using AccuVote systems that are 20 years old. They run on Windows XP. I'm hoping that nothing goes wrong tonight, but I think this is something that needs to get a little bit more attention, because we need to be talking about the equipment we're using. It's no secret why we're having these.
Chan, and that is a super interesting point. And take the opportunity of an LGBT candidate running for Supervisor of Elections in Broward County. Last Monday, when you watched the Iowa caucus, how did that wash over you?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I woke up the next morning and I wrote an op-ed, which thankfully the Sun Sentinel published, so I was very happy about that. And but here's the issue. we need to spend a lot more time doing contingency planning in elections administration. So a few issues that could come up here in Florida. What do we do if we have a hurricane a couple days before an election? What do we do if someone breaches our voter rolls, right? What do we do if the tabulators stop working? These are questions that we need to anticipate way ahead of time, and we need to have solutions to these problems before they become problems. What's gotten us into trouble in Broward in the past is that we had issues that could have been fixed. Bill Nelson's Senate race, right? I mean, if they had spent a little bit more time looking over the ballot, I think we could have solved that problem. If we had a clear recount procedure, there wouldn't have been mass confusion as we were recounting the ballot. So it's really important that when we think about elections administration, we also think about contingency planning, we think about emergency management, and these are the sorts of issues that I'm thinking about because I've now been to every county in the state. I've spoken with supervisors about everything that can go wrong. In Bay County last year, they had a Category 5 hurricane a few days before the election, and they managed to get their elections done well. And the reason they did it well is because they had tents and they had generators, and it was they figured out a way to do it. I honestly, as of today, I'm not sure how in Broward we would run an election if we had a Category 5 hurricane. I mean, our facility alone, the SOE is operating in a temporary facility that they've been in since 2006. The voters approved a new SOE facility in 2004, and we're still waiting for the construction. I don't want to know what would happen if we had a major hurricane strike that facility.
In America, you're watching an interesting thing in terms of the illustration of the value of an LGBT organization, grassroots in many counties in Florida. And you're listening to an LGBT candidate running for supervisor of elections of a very important county in Florida. You're listening to the implementation of the importance of what's going on in New Hampshire. We just don't realize what's going on in New Hampshire is important to us on the local level. Mm-hmm. And if we paid more attention to that, I think it would help all of us get out to vote even more. Aaron, introduce another guest that we're adding to the table.
So something else that you had talked about earlier was voters and reaching young people in their early years, and that's something that you actually do. So our next guest is Len Laritz. He's the founder of the Voter Participation Project, and I'm so happy to say that this is something that you've been doing for quite some time here in Broward County, and it's going into the school, pre-registering these students, and even registering homeless people, and really getting out there and registering LGBT people, talking to people on a very nonpartisan basis about the importance of voting, exercising that civic duty, and what's at stake in elections.
Yes. So the Voter Participation Project is actually two foundations, two affiliated foundations. The Education Fund is a C3, public charity, which means everything that we do has to be nonpartisan. The Action Fund, which is a C4, Social Welfare Foundation, its primary activity has to be nonpartisan, but its secondary activity can be partisan. So the Education Fund does primarily two things. We offer a whole spectrum of workshops for volunteers and for people who want to engage in conversations with other citizens. So we do voter orientation workshops, volunteer orientation workshops. We do voter registration workshops. We have a 2-hour voter engagement workshop where we teach people how to ask questions in order to have influence with other people instead of trying to tell them they're wrong, which doesn't work ever. I can go through the series, but we actually have a series of 6 workshops that we offer. Since the fall of 2017, we've trained over 1,600 volunteers in Broward. No other county has done that. I can assure you.
Do you in any way focus on the LGBT community, or is that just integrated in all of
That's integrated in all that we do.
Yeah.
Our workshops are available to everyone. We offer the workshops at locations throughout the county on a regular basis, and our workshops are available for any organization that wants them because it's nonpartisan. The second thing that the Education Fund does is voter registration. So we do voter registration in all the places that only a public charity can do them. So with churches, we partner with 8 or 10 other nonprofits in the county. But our 2 major voter registration projects are with the homeless and with high school students. Anthony Ginsburg is a remarkable man, but he has created the Homeless Project, both for sheltered homeless. There are 3 homeless shelters in the county, and for unsheltered homeless. And he's out there probably 40 hours a week, every day, engaging homeless people around the county, getting them registered, building trust with them, and working on effective ways to provide them with voter information, especially when there's a lot of turnover in his contact with them, and working on transportation to get them to the polls. Our other project is with high school students. There are about 35 public high schools in Broward, and there are 81 private high schools. Many of them are very small. But there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 voter registrations sitting there that need to be gotten. You can pre-register at 16, and so you can automatically vote.
Is your prediction in Broward County, as an example, for forecasting the election November 3rd, do you think our voter registration drives that we're doing and the get out to vote is going to increase for November 3rd, or are we going to be flat like we were in the last election?
I don't know that.
What's your guess?
My guess is that there will be an increase, but every time the supervisor elections comes out with the new data statewide, there are people that have been removed from the polls for a variety of reasons. So I don't have good data to tell you that.
Okay. Well, we give heads up to our production about our It's Happening Out. Anything else you want to add in this segment before we move?
Well, I think that just to connect all 3 of you, I mean, it's reaching out to young people, engaging them about the importance of politics, and then it's important organizations like the Delphin Democrats, like the LGBT Democratic Caucus, that you recruit. Harvey Milk so often said, let me recruit you. You recruit those people, and then what do? They run for office at the local level and at the national level, and then they become a leading contender for the presidency of the United States in New Hampshire.
Excellent summary. Gentlemen, we thank you very much for being with us tonight. This historic evening of the first LGBT broadcast of the New Hampshire primary tonight. As we get ready to add our It's Happening Out hosts back in to our table. Any thoughts so far tonight? Any experiences? Any thoughts about where we are in the election? Updates so far of our numbers?
Well, they now we're at 47% of precincts reporting, so almost halfway there. Sanders still at 1 with 26.7%, and Pete Buttigieg at second at 23.6%. Amy Klobuchar in third at 19.9%. Warren at 9.6%, and Biden in fifth at 8.3%. So not much is really changing. Biden and Buttigieg really kind of seem to just keep fluctuating by a 0.1 or 2% margin, but I do suspect that Senator Sanders will likely win New Hampshire. But again, it's not going to be a blowout like people were predicting.
And we don't want this to suddenly end either, as we saw with Iowa last week, as we've seen multiple times in Florida and with the entire nation. Just getting a quick result is not getting the accurate result, and it's important to get the data correct. It builds the momentum. It moves our country and this election process in the way that we want it to be moving, or at least with some sense of energy, not just a forced answer that comes too early when it's incorrect.
Well, to kind of go off of that, Senator Sanders actually touched on this, and that's that, primaries are much more reliable than caucuses. So I think that we can really trust a lot of the results that we're seeing coming in, and Senator Sanders.
Except apparently in Broward County.
Except apparently
right.
in Broward County.
I'm looking at these numbers, Napoleon, Aaron. It surprises me, and I'm just curious if it surprises you. A 3-point difference between Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete at this point, with 47% reporting. Does that surprise you at this moment in New Hampshire?
Well, I mean, Senator Sanders won this state by 23 points in 2016.
That's my surprise.
Yeah.
And he's the next door neighbor in Vermont.
He's the next door neighbor in Vermont, but you also could say the same thing with Elizabeth Warren, who's polling fourth at 9.6%. votes cast this evening in the Granite State. It's interesting to see because I really did think that Senator Sanders was going to do much better than he is. I thought he would win by probably an 8 to 9% margin. I didn't think it was going to be this close, but you know, with exit surveys that we saw coming out of New Hampshire tonight as the polls were closing, a majority of voters said that they were undecided and they made up their minds either last night or as they were going in to the voting booth. So very last minute. So this is literally any man, any woman's contest. This primary is very far from over. There is no clear front runner.
Surprise?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. This is what I've come to expect. Like you just said, this is a moment-to-moment change. If people were to vote today versus a week from today, it could be a completely different election. And that's what I've come to expect from the American people. Everything is so in the moment and about the cultural zeitgeist that I don't trust what the electoral results actually are. What it is today versus next week could breed a completely different president, and that would change the nation, not just in the 4 years, but with the Supreme Justices that are put into office. It would change everything. And we're just a flimsy back and forth, hot and cold Katy Perry nation.
That's a nice sound, but I was going to say we just proved. All right, so we're rebooting some energy here at the table with that comment. We welcome back to the table. It's Happening Out host, of course, you know Chef Josie, and our new It's Happening Out host, Ron Brunensky. Ron is our Republican conservative expert, our political expert out of Miami-Dade County. Chef Josie from Top Chef has a great restaurant here in Wilton Manors. And we'd also like to introduce somebody with the family of It's Happening Out and Q News Tonight, and that is Chris Warner. And Chris Warner, you know, but you don't know, he has worked for quite a long time with the show and the production in terms of a lot of our topics and things that we talk about at Q News Tonight.
Yeah, he's like the opposite of an internet troll. He's the one that tries to get your opinion and tries to facilitate the positivity.
Exactly right. And now Chris doesn't have much experience in doing this, so we will forgive him, and we've handed him the microphone, so he's going to keep it close.
He hands us notes every time about things we should say. He's a great wordsmith.
It's karaoke.
Yes, karaoke, exactly.
You don't want to hear me sing.
Yeah, right. We have Chris at the table in our final segment that we're doing in this historic first ever evening news at Q News Tonight of the LGBT, in the LGBT community of the New Hampshire primary. And Chris is sitting here on behalf of the show because he is a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. And we wanted to incorporate Chris in our last segment because of the anticipation of all of the pre-polls that Bernie was going to win it. And we thought, and Chris is an expert on Bernie Sanders. Chris, what do you think about what you're watching tonight at 47% reporting, and there's only 3 points between Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete?
It's about what I expected. All of the polling during the weekend, the last minute, had Bernie up by about...
Right to your mouth, please.
By about 4.5 points. So this is well within the margin of error. Sure, he won it by a lot more last time, but there were only 2 candidates, whereas this time there were 5 clearly really good candidates, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, as well as Biden and Warren. So him having about 26% of the vote, I think, is fairly strong for him.
Yeah, your first crystal ball. I keep talking about crystal balls tonight. Do you think he's?
Horizon.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny. Do you think he's going to hold on?
Yes, I think that he's going to lose a little bit of percentage as the cities neighboring Massachusetts, which are a little bit more economically wealthy than the ones that have reported so far, report in. But I think he's going to win by about 2 points if I had to prognosticate.
2 points is what your projection is.
I'm fine with that.
So far, our thoughts about what we've watched?
Well, let me jump in right now and just say, you know, New Hampshire, we have, that's a state of 1.3 million people who live there.
That's my backyard.
Okay. And, you know, and we're talking about less than 100,000 so far that have been, tallied. If you take a look at the population of New Hampshire is 91% white. Now, obviously, I have nothing against white people, okay? But quite frankly, New Hampshire doesn't decide my vote. As a woman of color, as someone who's grown up here in South Florida, New Hampshire doesn't reflect, I don't think, not only not my support, but also many voices across the country. So, you know, what this looks like, great. You know, maybe we're picking favorites and we're going to then start this high school popularity contest. But quite frankly, for me, New Hampshire doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, you can have that argument with Iowa and New Hampshire.
Yeah.
But perception is politics.
It is.
And right now, this is a perception. You're looking at Sanders and you're looking at Pete. They're the ones up front. What is surprising to me is the voting for Elizabeth Warren. I don't see a path for her. I believe that she is going to have to bring the campaign. I predict that she will be out of the campaign before
I agree. Before Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday.
But-
Yep.
Now,
I don't
here,
think so.
I think you will. Now, I'll tell you what really bothers me out of this. Biden goes to South Carolina in the middle of this election and decides to throw a party to kick off his campaign. Well, wait a minute. You couldn't win the Northeast or Iowa, and now you're coming to the South saying, "Oh, here I am. I'm the voice that will go forward." I think that you've got to understand that there is a lot of anger in what they have done for in the past history against Sanders, and a lot of people really, really are upset that hey, he was given an opportunity to could have been the candidate last time, and a lot of things were taken away. Super delegates, which we got rid of, the Democrats got rid of. Now they're going to bring it back again. I find that so disgusting that right now, and I'm not pro-Sanders, nor will I ever be, but I will tell you something. It really indicates how bad the Democratic Party is when it comes to leadership. You know, we leave tonight without having a front runner. We leave tonight without knowing who is going to be our opponent. Now, as a Republican, I'm happy as hell. But listen to me. It isn't about parties. It's what are we offering the American people as an alternative. And that worries me. Because you're looking at a Sanders and you're looking at Pete, two guys that have worked hard and have shown that they can make a difference.
I mean,
to have somebody like Bloomberg or Biden or anything else declare that what's important, it's not, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but what's important, it's not New Hampshire or Iowa. What's important is South Carolina. I find that offensive.
That's exactly what you've just described with everything that you said. You're laying out how the order of operations is the most imperative thing, which is that Iowa's first, New Hampshire is second, or just the way that everything plays out. That's exactly what the election is. All votes are not created equal from from the state that you're in being inequivalent in terms of who votes for, to the fact that delegates can actually vote for whoever they want. What we're seeing is all of the external forces of the order in which people vote, everything else coming into play, which it takes power away from the individual people. It takes power away from the votes of Americans to have all of this nonsense come into power more than the actual vote of the people. And that's what you're describing right here, is that the way that people vote in America isn't what's most important. It's the way that all this other nonsense plays out.
Now, what you're going to have tonight is who's going to have more delegates. Because it seems that the popular vote is not that important. What's important is how many delegates am I going to get to there. Now, regardless of what happens in South Carolina or what happens in Nevada, the fact is that Pete and Sanders are the ones which have the most delegates. And at the end of the day, that creates momentum in their campaign. And a lot of people will say, you know what, let's pay more attention to them. Now, I will believe that that assuming that Biden is going to make his grand stand, his final stand in South Carolina, well, excuse me, somebody's not doing the polls, because right now, 30% of the African-American vote in South Carolina is leaning towards Sanders. Now, that's very worrisome. If I was Biden, I would be worried as hell. I'm saying, wait a minute, I'm not making.
I'm curious. Let's involve Chris in this conversation. You are the surrogate advocate for Bernie Sanders here tonight. What do you think about that? That going to South Carolina, he might be able to hold on or stay close to Joe Biden.
I find it very likely, actually. Josie is right. White, right? Hold on.
Which of those things, Josie?
Iowa is very white. That's why I had that on my mind. But of the small amount that voted, 42% of minorities went to Bernie Sanders in Iowa. And that's a little known fact because they don't represent a massive population there, but they overwhelmingly voted for him. A large Hispanic community, a somewhat large Muslim community, and I feel like their voices are sometimes erased from the conversation because they are a minority and people focus on the white majority and they are speaking for them, but at the same time, ironically, saying, oh, you don't matter because you're a minority. Well, no, they voted at 11% of the population in Iowa, and almost half of them went to one candidate. That speaks volumes. Bernie Sanders doesn't speak to any one race, and I think sometimes people have a problem with that. They want him to focus on certain groups. But here are the facts. Medicare for All will help the African American community, which is disproportionately poor in this country. If you make less than $29,000 a year, you will pay $0 with Medicare for All. That's just a fact, already laid out. If you are an LGBT person, you're trans, his plan is the only plan that pays for gender reassignment surgery. The only one. And if you are a struggling youth and your parents kick you out, well, you don't have to be means tested into college education like if you follow Warren's plan or Pete's plan. It's college for all. Whereas under Pete's plan, if your parents make a lot of money, even if they have kicked you out of your house, you can't go to college. You can't become independent. And that speaks to people, not African Americans, not white people, just people. We have 30,000 people a year dying in this country, and we're scrabbling on how to pay for it. When we have the largest military budget in the world, when we have a current president who's willing to cut Social Security, cut Medicare, are you kidding me?
Chris, you make points about Bernie Sanders' platform. Why do you think that there's so much fear, perhaps in the LGBT community, but also for sure in the general community, that if he becomes the nominee, the Democrats can't beat Donald Trump?
Because of a really great misinformation campaign that has gone on since the end of the Cold War. I'm going to hit you with some polls, just straight up numbers, no bias. 44% of the LGBTQ plus people in Iowa voted for Bernie Sanders, just as much as the minorities, twice as much as Mayor Pete and Elizabeth Warren. In a recent poll, which you cited, you said that only 45% of people would vote for a socialist.
Yeah.
Well, in that same poll, 45% of people identified as independent, and that's the gold mine in this country. You gotta get independence. Well, in a recent Reuters poll, Bernie Sanders beats Donald Trump among independents 46 to 28. That is an 18-point margin, which tells you two things. Oh, the next closest was +4. That was Biden, by the way. That tells you two things. One, apparently independents know the difference between a democratic socialist, like Denmark, and a socialist, say Venezuela, which the Republicans love to bring up a lot. And, that really shows that everyone knows Bernie's a socialist. That's not going to be the October surprise.
He calls himself that, a democratic socialist.
Exactly. And so if they try to say, hey, he's a democratic socialist, that's dangerous, Bernie has the answer. He can look at Donald Trump and say, you're a corporate socialist. You cut taxes on the rich and corporations more than anyone. Yeah, I might be a democratic socialist, sure, but I'm working to help working families. You only care about the rich.
But I think the wider conversation here that I think that I am concerned about, and I think that other people probably here at this table are concerned about, are love Bernie. Truly. I love a lot of the things that he stands for. For me, he's got the right message. He's just the wrong messenger. But when you talk about the idea of being a democratic socialist, and that's not a slur. That's what he says. He calls himself that. I'm thinking about what's playing out in our country right now, the impeachment of a president that is morally and completely and totally corrupt. And the Senate, the House, when you have someone at the top of the ticket that identifies as a democratic socialist in a battleground state, a purple state, which can go either way, and we've seen that with Obama and we've seen that with Trump, how is that going to affect down ballot candidates? How is that going to affect the very Democrats that he needs to carry, that if he wants to do Medicare for all, if he wants to tackle gun violence, if he wants to do any of these great grand ideas, how is he going to be able to get that done if he doesn't have a Democratic Congress and a Democratic Senate to get him there?
He's going to help, and here's why. I gave you the numbers. 46 to 28 in a poll that says independents favor Bernie. You have fear.
I don't have fear. Polls.
That's all you have.
Polls change.
Yeah.
Well, we remember 2016 as Josie and I are pointing out right now.
Here's my thing. If you really take stock in those polls, you're like me in 2016
It's 4 years of polls.
CNN on the election day had 88% likelihood of Hillary Clinton winning the Electoral College.
Right.
That didn't happen. There's one thing that you should know, and that everyone at this table and everyone watching to know, is that polls do not matter. What matters, more importantly, is that you get off your ass and that you vote, regardless of who you're going to vote for. If you care about what's going on in your country and your community and your backyard as an LGBT person, you get up and you vote. You don't pay attention to these polls. These polls are meant to be tools of oppression to get people not to turn out and vote. Do you know how many people Hillary Clinton, she talks about it in her book, What Happened, which really is an autopsy of what the hell happened? Why did I lose this election that should have been a slam dunk for me? And in the process, become the first woman president of the United States. One of the biggest things people say to her and continue to say to her is, you know, Hillary, I am so sorry I didn't turn out and vote. I saw all these polls and I saw this media campaign that you talked about. And they're telling me, these polls, that I didn't need to vote and I didn't think my vote mattered because you were going to win anyway. So what you're kind of saying is you're perpetuating that campaign, that stereotype that's meant to act as a tool of oppression to suppress people like you, like I, who are somewhat progressive or liberal-minded from turning out and voting. And it plays in the very pockets and hands of people like Ron and the Republicans that are going to have a very good opportunity to win in 2020.
You made a very good point, and the fact of the matter is that look at the number of people that turn out to vote in New Hampshire. Right now, I believe you said it was 13%, 14%, or whatever it is. Excuse me, that's not a huge number. What happened to the rest of the Democrats that did not participate?
No. I don't want you to misquote me there. I said that they had a low voter turnout.
Low voter turnout, regardless of what it is.
It's
still low. 13%. You did not inspire.
I want to touch on that.
That's 13% reporting.
Okay. No. But not even that. No, 13% of people that turned out to vote in this primary said that if their candidate does not win, they will not vote
you're
for that
absolutely
Democratic
right.
nominee.
But here's the whole thing. The low turnout means one thing in the Democratic Party. You still do not have a candidate that inspires unity, that inspires faith, that inspires the emotion that it takes to become elected president of the United States.
A lot of them do that, but then we also get into, since we're talking about Bernie Sanders, the idea that not every candidate actually gets the people that are supporting him or her to vote for everyone else. That is something that we have not talked about yet with Bernie Sanders, but that is one of the key points about him, is that every other Democratic candidate will stay for votes for him, should vote for whichever is the candidate.
Bernie has said that.
Has he?
He said that on 3 different morning shows.
He has. He
has finally said that people should vote for whoever it is. He has definitely not always said that.
2016.
Yes, he did.
He did not.
Wait, if I may,
you may.
He hosted 43 rallies for Hillary Clinton after he fought hard to get progressive agendas on her platform. But then he hosted 43 events.
Okay.
And also to just.
I love that you said this. You're walking right into it.
Oh, I love it because here's the thing: you use the same fear mongering that you said that I use. You talked about a poll where it said, "Oh, only 45% of people would vote for a socialist." I'm just quoting a poll back at you, so you can't accuse me.
No.
If I may,
okay, you may.
I let you talk. So you are using a poll, and you said, "Oh, 45% of people," and then you say my poll is off. They're just equal. If you want to use votes, I would love to use votes. Michigan, 2016, battleground state. Hillary lost. Bernie beat her in the primary.
He's obsessed with 2016. Let's talk about now. That's my problem with this coalition.
Okay.
And I know that Josie agrees with me, and so does
You
Al
don't
and
want
other people
polls.
here.
You don't want
No, it's not about polls. It's
2016.
about living in the past. It's about unity, and this is why you're going to have a hard time getting people like me on board with someone
It's
like Senator
because
Sanders.
you're never
And-
gonna-
and let
you're
me
never gonna
touch on
vote for
this. Let me
Sanders.
touch on
Let's
this.
just say it.
No, I'm not going to say that because I don't know what
You
I
don't
will
listen to
do.
polls.
I will say
You
that
don't
I
listen
will
to
tell you that
2016.
I will tell you that I do not believe that Bernie Sanders will be the nominee of the Democratic Party. Whoever is the Democratic nominee, I will vote for whoever that is. But I do want to let you know that because you want to talk about this big unity thing and Bernie Sanders did so much for Hillary Clinton, I completely disagree with you. You said 43 events. Hillary Clinton fought a very hard-fought Democratic primary in 2008 against Barack Obama, campaigned for him 178 times. And let me remind you this, my
That's
friend.
not true.
That is true. That is true. That is true. They know this at the table. That is
18.
true. And Martin O'Malley, Governor Martin O'Malley, that ran in 2016 as well, did more campaign events and appearances. Check his Twitter 3 days ago, him confirming this himself, did more campaign events and appearances and rallies for Hillary Clinton than Bernie Sanders did. I don't want this to be a Bernie or Hillary thing, and unfortunately that's what it's turned into.
I want you to see this very interesting conversation. So I want to look at you directly in your eye, Napoleon, and tell you, you see why we Republicans are so confident that we will have our next president reelected? Because we still do not have in the Democratic Party one person that unites them.
It may be the soundbite of the New Hampshire primary. It may be. Because we dealt with Iowa and the Democratic Party really royally screwed it up.
That's right.
We're dealing with New Hampshire where there is great division. This argument, to Ron's point, Ron's perspective is completely outside of the rest of the table, and the question is, which is, we're getting ready to finish. We're going to report the numbers that we have, and then we'll continue to watch, but bring an end to our broadcast tonight. The thing that I want to ask you to, in very specific terms. Are you confident at this point, first primary, are you confident, I'm not asking Ron.
No.
Are you confident that the Democratic nominee, whoever that is going to be, is going to win on November 3rd, 2020? Are you confident? Yes?
Yes.
You are. Josie?
I can't answer that yet.
If everything...
In this moment, no, I'm not confident.
Yeah. Napoleon?
I'm confident that they'll not only lose, but that Trump will be in office for at least 2 terms.
And you think there's something else dramatic coming. And Aaron?
A lot.
I believe if the race is going to continue to go and a path forward of going and veering towards the direction of nominating Senator Sanders, I think that you are giving Donald Trump another 4 years.
Well, and to these answers, it seems to me again, I think value in Ron sitting at the table, because we bring the Trojan horse into the walls and say, let's listen to the Trojan horse very carefully, because if you watch our social media, it is overwhelming of what is being said about Donald Trump. There's no question. It is overwhelming what is being said. But it seems like we have concerns that his soundbite is true.
You saw it happen right here with Chris and with Aaron. They're at odds with each other now. They've let the Republican walk on by.
Well, no, and I
they're
think
going,
we can't end this conversation without bringing in Elizabeth Warren. And I'm gonna say that right now because we're forgetting about this very smart, this very talented, this workhorse, and with this grassroots campaign, who is not as she's not as I guess polarized as Bernie Sanders, and she comes from, this is my experience of her. All I know is sitting in rooms with Team Warren. I know this, okay? They are prepared out on the fields. To outwork. Okay, outwork, out-organize, and outlast everyone in this race.
Her path? Where is she going to stand? Where is she going to make a stand? What is her path?
With her grassroots support.
When it comes right now, look at the states which are coming up.
The people will take her there.
You're going to have South Carolina. If she gets defeated and ends up in 3rd and 4th place, you've got 3 states that have already gone towards that way. Now, in the South, with things change, Where is she? Where and not Nevada?
Super
Do you actually
Tuesday,
think
Super Tuesday?
so now?
1,700
Everybody
delegates,
everybody brings up Super Tuesday. And I'm glad you did that because I'm sure I hope that we do this again Super Tuesday. But I'm going to tell you something. We now in Super Tuesday are going to have a person that we didn't have in the early states, which is Mike Bloomberg. So now things get even more confused. What do we do? I find it offensive, and I'm not a Sanders supporter, obviously, but I'm going to tell you, I find it offensive for all those candidates who are working their butt off from Iowa all the way to Nevada for one candidate to show up and says, well, here, I just bought all the election, I'm running. So now we're going to have, what's the choice in the Democratic Party? A millionaire against a billionaire? Is that what we're talking
That's exactly,
about? That is sad.
That's what the Republicans
really
want. And one of the things you've been very good at highlighting in this conversation, and every time we speak, and it's one of the reasons I love you too, is because you're very good at highlighting the idea that the Democrats just want to perpetuate. Like I said it was nonsense before, and I will say it again. That's exactly what you're fighting for. Because we, as Democrats, fight for passion and what we believe is right. And we're sitting there going all about it in ourselves and are punching through walls to get there. But the Republicans think about this logically. And just like you've said in every comment that you've had tonight, you're saying this is what they're doing to plan out why this is strategically the best. It doesn't matter if they don't win the popular vote because that doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter that they didn't really win the presidency. It just matters that they technically won. And that's what you're outlining right here. And it's what we're going to see with a presidential candidate here too. The Democrats are going to lose because they're not thinking about it with their heads. They're thinking about it in morality, which the Republicans won't do.
I'm going to we're going to close up this special broadcast. Aaron, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we're going to move on.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the other woman that's in this race.
Oh, yes, of
right
course,
now.
Amy
And of course,
Klobuchar.
that's the one who I've actually donated more money to Amy Klobuchar than I did Hillary Clinton. That's how much I really think that she is the perfect antidote in person to go up against Donald Trump. I think that she and Mayor Pete are two people that I'm really looking at right now that are centrist Democrats that really, it's about coalition building. And I know that Ron, I know that you agree with this. It's about coalition building because when you are able to build coalitions with people who are moderate Republicans and with independents, that's when you can win big. Because if you look in 2008, Barack Obama, there were 31 counties that he won. In 2016, those same 31 counties out of 99 counties, they went to Trump. I mean, you look at this in terms of coalition building and nominating someone from the Midwest that can play in the Midwest, those battleground states that you need to win to get to 270. You need to win to get to 270. Nominate someone from the Midwest. Literally 42 counties in Minnesota that all went Trump. Guess who won all 42 of those rural, red, Republican counties? Amy Klobuchar. This is about coalition building. It's about being sensitive to Democrat and to Republican. And it's not about being Democrat or Republican. It's about being a president for all of America. And I think as this Democratic primary continues to play out, Amy's in third right now. I did not expect that ever to happen.
Yeah, that's the news.
It's amazing, and we need to highlight that a woman is coming third, and that a woman is still a contender, a major contender for the presidential nomination in 2020. That this race, as it continues to play out, that the Democrats, regardless of who you're supporting, we will collectively come together, we will unify, and we will do what we need to do to build coalitions across all demographics and communities and do our best to defeat Donald Trump in November 3rd, 2020.
Aaron, with that in mind, report the final statistics where we're at now in New Hampshire.
So as of 10:10 this evening, we are now at 59% reporting. Senator Sanders currently occupying first place at 26%. Pete Buttigieg second at 23.9%. Amy Klobuchar in third place at 20.1%. Wow. Elizabeth Warren at 9.5%. And Joe Biden at 8.4%. So virtually a 2-point difference between Senator Sanders and America's first openly gay candidate for the presidency of the United States.
Yes, if this trend continues, even if Mayor Pete loses, if he loses by 2 percentage points in New Hampshire,
it's a win.
It is
it's a win for all of us.
A win
Yes.
for the LGBT community. Of course, we're going to continue to watch this. I thank all of you for our conversation. We're getting ready to end. America, we told you right from the beginning. We started our broadcast at 7 o'clock with Q News tonight. This was historic. I want to thank all of the participants connected, all of the guests that we had tonight, 16 guests from a whole gamut of ranges of representation that are going to make an impact of whatever the outcome is on November 3rd, 2020. I want to thank the Happening Out Television Network staff, Darren Lowley, the executive producer, Steve Smith, who is our director, Jared Curry, who has been our video coordinator and director with Steve, David Hopkins, who helps us with our video and our construction, Alejandro Ferro, who works in our construction at Happening Out and our news division, Chris Swarner, who coordinates our topics and our information, our It's Happening Out host every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock on the most popular live gay TV show in the world. 500 to 600,000 people watch every week. Ron Brunetsky, Chef Josie, Power Infinity, and Aaron Phoenix. We thank you. My Q News Tonight partners, and also It's Happening Out partner, Napoleon Plays, and I thank you. And especially I thank tonight our Q News Tonight partner, Aaron Darr. Aaron has largely been responsible for the content and the guests that participated in this, and I thank you very much, and you did a great job.
Yeah, you could be Gen Z and still be very impactful to everyone around.
Exactly.
Show the world, man.
Actually motivational. We have to tell you, as we started, that this is historic. We had tonight a presidential candidate win the first caucus and is right now only 2 points behind a mayor of a major metropolitan city, a mayor of Wilton Manors, or rather a candidate in Wilton Manors where we have a gay mayor and the entire city council is gay, and it's all reported by the first live gay evening news show in the world. It is a very important night, and we thank you for joining with us. So that's it in our first reporting ever of an LGBT news organization reporting at a national presidential primary. And that is Q News Tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, everyone here.
Good night, everybody.